It was here in 1985 that Captain Gary Eastburn lived with his wife Catherine and their 3 daughters, about 10 minutes from the base where he served. Shortly before the events in question, Captain Gary received a promotion, which required him to undergo training at officer school. Consequently, he had to leave his family for a while, attending officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, for about 10 weeks. This was an important step, as the family was planning to move to England, where Gary could serve in the Royal Air Force. Gary had a strong marriage that lasted for 10 years, and they kept in touch while separated. However, on Saturday, May 11, 1985, Gary tried to call his wife several times, but to no avail. He took advantage of several breaks to call but never received an answer. Finally, he reached out to one of his friends who remained on Fort Bragg and asked him to check on his wife. The man did so, but when he knocked on the door, no one answered. He couldn't wait forever, so he simply left Catherine a note, asking her to call her husband back as soon as she could. While shining a flashlight and walking around the house, the friend accidentally woke up a neighbor named Bob Seafelt. When Gary called Bob, he mentioned that he had no idea what was going on with Catherine, but everything seemed strange. After a fitful night's sleep, Bob woke up the next day, with troubling thoughts swirling in his mind. He noticed that a stack of newspapers had piled up near the neighbor's door and realized he had last seen Catherine leave for the store on Thursday. Bob went to the neighbor's door and knocked, but no one answered. Listening closely, it seemed to Bob that he could hear a child crying inside. Knowing the family well, he assumed it was the youngest daughter, who was about 2 years old at the time. Concerned about the situation, Bob called the police at 12:53 p.m. and asked them to check on the family. When the patrolman arrived at the scene, they began the standard procedure and shone his flashlight through the windows. They saw the baby in a crib, appearing pale and emaciated. Despite the protocol the officer needed to follow, they instinctively felt that something alarming had occurred. A patrolman immediately cut through the window screen and entered the house. Upon entering, he saw the baby girl, who was alive but in dire condition. Later, authorities reported that a few more hours in that house could have been fatal for her. After handing the baby over to his partner, the patrolman returned inside the house, checking the rooms with his weapon drawn. In the main bedroom, he discovered the lifeless body of 3-year-old Erin Eastburn. A pillow covered the child's face, and it was apparent that her throat had been cut, with her head nearly severed from her body. She lay on the floor next to her parents' bed, where Catherine also lay. A pillow covered Catherine's face as well. When the officer removed it, he saw that her throat was cut, she was naked and had suffered multiple stab wounds, indicating she had been abused. The scene was horrifying, with blood everywhere. The patrolman ran outside, trying to catch his breath. When he was reminded that the family had 3 children, they still needed to find one more child who might be alive and in danger. He returned to the house, found Kara, but there were no signs of life. The 5-year-old had died in the same manner as her mother and sister. When the investigation began, detectives quickly noticed that a similar crime had occurred 15 years earlier involving a military family, the MacDonald family, who were killed in a similar fashion. This crime was committed by a military man, a husband and father named Jeffrey. Numerous coincidences were found in the handwriting of the criminals and the circumstances of these 2 murders, suggesting that they could have been committed by the same person. However, at the time of the massacre of the Eastburn family, Jeffrey MacDonald was already behind bars and could not have been involved in this crime. Rumors spread quickly, leading many to believe that Jeffrey MacDonald could have had an accomplice or an imitator. Forensic experts found blood all over the house, as well as clear traces of cleaning in some places, indicated by X stains of blood. It was obvious that the criminal had tried to clean up but left even more traces. Using luminol, investigators could see that the marks had been erased on the bathroom door handles. Likely, the perpetrator used a towel that had been thrown into the laundry basket. The crime was believed to have been committed between 8 p.m. on May 9 and 3 a.m. on May 10, 1985. As it turns out, the last person to see the family alive was the nanny, Julie. The young girl had been babysitting the youngest daughter for several days before their bodies were found and was automatically placed on the suspect list. Julie mentioned prank calls that Catherine had complained about before she was killed. Some man had been calling several times a day for 3 months, but it didn't particularly bother Catherine. She didn't feel any danger from these calls and never went to the police. Julie remembered another person with whom Catherine had been in contact, a certain Angela who was going to take the dog from the Eastburns, Dixie. Due to plans to move, they decided to give it away because there was no one to leave it with. According to the nanny, Catherine had left an ad in the newspaper, and after that, she received a call from Angela. Julie was curious about what happened next and unexpectedly shifted the focus back to the bloody crime of 15 years ago. She was worried that it could have been committed by a copycat of Jeffrey MacDonald and wanted to know what the police thought about it. The detective had no trouble getting the suspicious nanny to talk. She willingly shared her long friendship with Dr. MacDonald, believing that he was innocent. They had known each other for a long time and even exchanged letters for several years while he was in prison. When she was asked about her interest in the case, she was unable to justify his behavior, and the detective did not pay much attention to her words. When she confirmed her alibi, he simply removed her from the list of suspects. The police continued to work in the Eastburn house even after midnight, despite the late hour. A young man named Patrick Cohn approached them and decided to tell them about what he saw on the night of Friday, May 10, 1985, at about 3:30 a.m. He noticed a tall, fair-skinned man in jeans, a knitted hat, and a black jacket leaving Eastburn House. The man was carrying a garbage bag slung over his shoulder, got into his white Chevrolet Chevette, and drove away. Patrick's statement was taken seriously, and he was brought to the police station to help create a composite sketch. When the portrait was finished, there was a striking resemblance to a serviceman named Timothy Hennis. He was a 27-year-old man who, along with his younger brother and sister, had been adopted by the Hennis family, a couple who took all 3 of their children from an orphanage. They grew up in a fairly well-off family in Minnesota, which provided them with a bright future. Shortly before these tragic events, Tim married Angela in secret before Christmas in 1984. That same year, Tim's brother died in a motorcycle accident, so they opted for a modest celebration instead of a lavish ceremony. A couple of years later, they had a daughter, Christina. Tim admitted that he was familiar with the victim, Catherine, but there was a good reason for it. They decided to get dog for company, leading to the contact with the woman from the ad. Tim denied any involvement in the crime but mentioned a curious coincidence. He had arranged to meet Catherine on Tuesday, May 7th, just 3 days before the crime, to look at Dixie. When Tim first met the police, everyone was amazed because he looked exactly like the composite sketch. The police asked him to sign a waiver of Miranda rights, to which he agreed, provided he could be assured that he was not a suspect, which turned out to be a ruse. Timothy provided fingerprints, hair samples, saliva, and blood. He confirmed that he had indeed met Catherine that Tuesday and had taken her dog, after which they had not seen each other again. Timothy denied any involvement in the crime and provided a detailed account. Witness Patrick was called to identify him, and he pointed to Timothy. Despite Timothy's insistence that he had not been in the area early in the morning of May 10th, suspicions against him grew stronger due to his lack of an alibi. The police did not yet have an arrest warrant, so Timothy was released. However, after 7 hours, he was detained, officially charged with triple first-degree murder and abuse. Naturally, Timothy was not the only suspect. As is often the case, the police first considered the widower Gary Eastburn. When Gary was informed of the events, he remained surprisingly calm and simply asked if at least one family member had survived. When he learned that only the youngest daughter had survived, he broke down in tears. Gary had grown up as an ordinary young man. At the age of 12, his parents divorced, and his relationship with his stepfather did not work out. Despite this, he had a relatively calm childhood. He met Catherine in 1972, approximately 13 years before the tragedy. At that time, he was around 25 years old, having been born in 1947. Their daughter Kara was born in 1980. Gary decided to become a military man to support his growing family. When he finally returned to the city after the tragedy, he wanted to reach his surviving child. Instead, He was immediately taken to the police station for questioning, where they held him until about 2 a.m. Gary provided a reliable alibi. His blood and hair samples were taken before he was released. He was able to see his daughter late at night. She was in serious condition and did not even recognize him. Afterward, he went into their home to see what was missing. Gary had no idea who could have attacked his wife and children. They had no obvious enemies, but he remembered several prank calls that had started a few months before he left for training at officer school. The caller addressed Catherine by her first and last name, but no one paid attention to it at the time. Everyone thought it was just teenagers playing around, so no one raised the alarm. Now, in light of the tragic events, the calls seemed more suspicious. However, they could not be tracked due to a lack of technology at that time. After inspecting the house, the police reported that a metal safe containing important family documents was missing, along with $300 in cash that had been set aside for Christmas and Catherine's wallet with bank cards. This provided valuable clues. The ATM was identified, and it turned out that a transaction was made using Catherine's card. It was used shortly after the murders, including a transaction on May 11th. Detectives found a witness who provided a description of the man who came at night to withdraw cash, and this description exactly matched Timothy Hennis. In addition, she saw a white car belonging to Timothy. At this stage, the whole city already knew about the crime and the main suspect. Other witnesses also came forward. Timothy's neighbor saw him burning something in his backyard the day after the murder, likely getting rid of evidence. A local dry cleaner reported that Timothy had brought them a black jacket right after the crime. According to the description, it resembled the clothing that the witness Patrick had described. Timothy was questioned when his ex-wife said he had come to visit her that fateful night. His landlord mentioned that Timothy had not paid the rent for the house, which had accumulated over $300 in debt, but as soon as the eviction notice was served on May 10th, Timothy paid it off almost immediately. But where did he get the money so quickly? It seemed strange that the same amount disappeared from the home of the murdered family. Indirect evidence against Timothy was accumulating, but there was no irrefutable proof. By Christmas, it was decided to allow the suspect to post bail with the help of his relatives, and he managed to raise the funds. The reason for this leniency was the results of laboratory tests indicating that his biological materials did not match any evidence. Specifically, his blood type did not match. However, this could be attributed to the low accuracy of the testing methods used at that time. The prosecutor's office decided to turn to the only survivor of that bloody night, 2-year-old Jana. After the tragedy, the girl had not been able to come to her senses for a long time, but by February of the following year, she finally spoke. Gary was categorically against involving his daughter in the investigation, fearing that she would suffer further psychological trauma, but under pressure from the police, he ultimately agreed in order to seek justice for the victims. A special psychologist from North Carolina held 5 recorded conversations with Jana. During this time, she experienced several panic attacks and was still unable to recognize Timothy's photo. Based on the results of these sessions, it remained unclear whether there was one perpetrator or multiple criminals. Thus, the prosecutor's office decided to refuse to use Jana's testimony in the case. The trial was set for April 27, 1986. Timothy rejected the plea bargain offered by the prosecution. His lawyer wanted to change the location of the hearing but ultimately decided it would not make much difference. Instead, the defense focused on refuting the numerous circumstantial evidence on which the prosecution's case was based. The lawyer argued that the witness Patrick was lying when he claimed to have seen Timothy, described his appearance and car in such detail, especially since it had happened at night. He questioned how Patrick could have seen all of this in the dark. The lawyer discovered that the witness was going through a difficult time and had been pressured by the police. During numerous meetings with Timothy's lawyer, Patrick admitted that he might have made a mistake during the identification. The more he talked with the defense, the less certain he became about having seen Timothy on the street that night. On the day of the trial, the lawyer tried to get Patrick to admit that he had participated in the identification under pressure from detectives, but he did not. The defense discovered something even more significant. During the investigation, the police had gained access to the Fort Bragg duty log, which showed that Tim was on duty at the time of the crime, but this page mysteriously disappeared during the investigation. The lawyer believed that the detectives had intentionally torn out this page. Now, the defense attorney pressed this fact, interpreting the police's behavior as an attempt to convict an innocent person by destroying evidence of his innocence. Timothy's family was away at the time of the crime. The prosecution proposed a theory that Timothy had taken advantage of his wife's absence to start a romantic relationship with Catherine and visited her home on that fateful evening. However, Catherine rejected his advances, which angered him, leading him to kill her and her 2 children. The discussion then turned to the bank card. It was determined that the payment method had been used at 2:52 a.m. on May 11th when the defendant was on duty. Although this could not be confirmed, there was reasonable doubt that Timothy could have used it. Even though there was still no confirmed alibi for the night of the crime, the lawyers systematically managed to destroy the majority of the prosecution's arguments and raised doubts among the jury in order to convince them of Timothy's innocence. The prosecution presented frightening photographs from the crime scene and autopsies of the victims, about 100 photographs, which were included in a slideshow that lasted more than an hour. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Despite the defense attorney's desperate attempts to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence, on July 4, 1986, Timothy Hennis was found guilty on all counts. The defense attorney believed that the main reason for this verdict was their failure to insist on a change of venue. He felt that his job was not finished since Timothy was sentenced to death, so he focused on saving his client's life. Interestingly, just a few days after starting his sentence, Timothy received a postcard in prison signed by Mr. X. In it, a mysterious stranger claimed responsibility for killing Timothy's family and apologized for Timothy serving time for his crimes. Mr. X admitted that he had left North Carolina and had no intention of returning. Timothy informed his lawyer about the postcard. Later, it was used at the retrial, but at the time of its receipt, the prosecutor dismissed it as a forgery. During this period, Timothy's parents rallied around him. Despite their divorce, they made every effort to save enough money to pay for his defense. The Supreme Court of North Carolina was approached, and the lawyers cited bias, arguing that the jury had been provoked by the photographs. The defense insisted that nearly 100 gruesome images from the massacre were guaranteed to elicit a negative reaction from the jury. Despite the lack of irrefutable evidence against Timothy, it came to light that several detectives who led the case were nearing retirement. The lawyers believed they simply did not want to leave behind an unsolved crime of such magnitude and were seeking a scapegoat, which they considered Timothy Hennis to be. The defense successfully secured a change of venue to Wilmington, a coastal town located 100 kilometers from Fayetteville. The new prosecutor agreed to this change without hesitation, confident in the prosecution's tactics, but the defense was well prepared and closed all loopholes except for one. There was still no reliable confirmation of the defendant's whereabouts on the night of the murder. The defense aimed to discredit the prosecution's main witness, Patrick, in court. During the interval between the first and second trials, Patrick had committed several minor offenses, including driving without a license. When stopped by the authorities, he advised them to contact the district attorney since he was a witness in the Timothy case. The lawyers believed this statement practically indicated that he had received a bribe from the very beginning. More thorough examinations of the collected evidence refuted the case against Timothy. The shoe prints found inside the house were 3 sizes smaller than his. There was blood on a towel in the bathroom, as well as other traces that did not match his profile. The defense presented a black jacket to the judge that was tested for bloodstains. Even the hair found on Catherine's body did not belong to Timothy. In this context, the numerous circumstantial pieces of evidence that the prosecutor's office had used in the first trial appeared less convincing during the retrial. The prosecution attempted to challenge all the defense's arguments with their own versions, but none of this was compelling in light of the thorough preparation from the defense. 2 days later, the jury found Timothy not guilty on all counts. It is noteworthy that during this hearing, only a few photographs from the crime scene were shown, as opposed to the 100 images in a lengthy slideshow during the first trial. 3 years later, Timothy was released from death row. He re-enlisted in military service, served in Saudi Arabia and Somalia, and then returned to the United States. In 1998, Timothy and his family settled in Fort Lewis, Washington. In 2004, he retired from the Army and took a job at a waste processing plant. He also became a Boy Scout leader. Meanwhile, widower Gary followed his plan and moved with his surviving daughter to the UK. In 2009, he served in the Royal Air Force, after which he married a nurse. In 2009, after leaving the Air Force, Gary returned to the US and settled in Washington. Subsequently, legislation was amended to prohibit retrials for individuals already convicted twice of the same crime. Disagreements arose on the basis that during the first trial, Timothy was in military service, thereby placing him under a different jurisdiction. This left the state in limbo, although it did not exclude the possibility that he could be brought to retrial. Despite such situations being rare in the state's judicial practice, they did not return to the case for almost 20 years. It seemed that life was improving, but the case of the triple murder remained unsolved. Finally, in 2006, a detective investigating particularly brutal murders decided to test the DNA materials collected from the body of Catherine. However, the only information the laboratory could provide at that time was that the collected samples belonged to a light-skinned individual. By 2010, the laboratory in North Carolina became embroiled in a significant scandal. It turned out that over the past decade and a half, the state crime lab systematically concealed or manipulated evidence to ensure convictions. This was revealed in at least 230 cases, 10 of which resulted in the wrongful conviction of innocent people sentenced to death. 3 of them even received lethal injections and were deprived of life. The DNA in the Eastburn case was retested, and the examination showed that the materials from the crime scene in the archive matched those of Timothy Hennis. In light of such convincing evidence, his trial was reopened for the 3rd time. Timothy hired the best military lawyer named Frank Spinner to lead his defense team. The lawyer attempted to tarnish the reputation of the victim, Catherine, by alleging that she was promiscuous with Timothy, hinting that that was why his DNA might have turned up in her home. Timothy argued that she was unfaithful to him and that the real killer was an individual named Mr. X, who had written a postcard to him while he was in prison. This attempt had the opposite effect. The prosecutor's office pointed out the obvious lie, as Timothy had previously denied any intimate contact with Catherine. He later claimed that he initially did not disclose the affair due to fear of exposure. Despite a fierce struggle for Timothy's freedom, the chosen tactics now appeared unconvincing. On April 15, 2010, a jury recommended that Hennis be sentenced to death. In addition, he was demoted to Private E1, stripped of all pay and allowances, dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Hennis was incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where he remains to this day. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Under U.S. legislation, without the president's approval, they cannot execute him. Therefore, the likelihood that he will be deprived of life is low. The U.S. military has not executed anyone from its ranks since 1961. Interestingly, in 1985, when the murders of the Eastburn family occurred, a 20-year-old woman from Rochester, Minnesota, where Tim had lived for a long time, contacted the police to share her story. Upon hearing about the triple murder in North Carolina, she revealed that at the age of 11, she had been abused by Timothy Hennis. Unfortunately, due to a data error, she was not permitted to testify. Had she been allowed to do so, the outcome of the second trial, when he was acquitted, could have been entirely different, and he would most likely have been found guilty again. Even now, this trial raises more questions than answers. The story of the nanny, who cared for the Eastburn children, also raises many questions. Julie was addicted, and there were witnesses who heard her confess to the crime. Additionally, her unhealthy obsession with Jeffrey MacDonald, with whom she even corresponded, raises further doubts. Some supporters of Timothy believe that it was Julie who could have imitated her idol and killed the family with whom she worked. Around 2 a.m., Sasha Samsudian returned to her apartment in downtown Orlando after a fun night out with friends. Security cameras showed her walking into the building alone. But later, police would show up at her door. What they found inside shocked everyone. The clues they uncovered led to a dark and unexpected truth. At just 27 years old, Sasha had carved out a promising life for herself. She worked as a social media manager for a local real estate agency, based in Orlando, Florida, a job she was passionate about and in which she excelled. Sasha was more than just a pretty face, she described as energetic, sharp, and vibrant. Colleagues praised her professionalism, while friends admired her zest for life. She worked hard, celebrated often, and had a magnetic presence. Recently, she had moved into uptown apartments at 911 North Orange Avenue, eager to embrace a new chapter in her life. Sasha was thriving both professionally and personally, and she was making every moment count. On the night of the Orlando soccer season finale, Sasha dressed in purple to cheer for her team. After a thrilling win, she joined friends at the Attic Bar on East Pine Street to continue the celebration. Shortly after midnight, she decided to leave. It wasn't unusual for her friends to split up for the night, planning to regroup later. Sasha had plans for breakfast the next morning with a friend. But when she didn't show up and didn't respond to calls or texts, he began to worry. Sasha was always connected and always responsive. Hours went by without a word. By afternoon, concern turned into alarm. Some of her friends went to check on her. In the parking lot of her apartment complex, Sasha's car was there. Inside the back seat was a baby shower gift she had planned to bring that day. They knocked on the door of Unit 34 years, but there was no answer. At 8 p.m., they called 911. When police entered the locked apartment, the living areas appeared untouched. But inside the bedroom, they made a horrifying discovery. Sasha's lifeless body was partially hidden under a duvet, with a hand visible at the edge of the bed. She had been brutally assaulted, abused, strangled, and beaten. Her body bore signs of a struggle, with defensive wounds and abrasions. Her clothing had been torn, the necklace she had worn was tangled in her hair. Her phone, purse, and key fob were missing. There was a strong smell of cleaning agents in the room, and suspicious bleach stains marked the bed sheets. Sasha's cleaning supply cabinet stood open, a condom wrapper and shoe print were found nearby. Investigators noted something unusual: the toilet seat was up, a small but strange detail considering Sasha lived alone. Fingerprints were found on the underside of the seat, and DNA was collected from her body during the autopsy. The medical examiner reported severe trauma to her neck, unlike anything he had seen before. The police turned to the public for help, asking anyone who had seen anything in the early hours of that Saturday to come forward. Security footage from the apartment complex showed Sasha returning home just before 2 a.m. Cameras captured her in the hallway, but her entrance into the building was not straightforward. According to the on-site security guard, Stephen Duxbury, Sasha didn't have her key fob and entered when another resident opened the door. Stephen admitted that he later found Sasha struggling to enter her apartment. She told him she might have left her keys in her car and asked him to walk with her, but moments after stepping outside, she turned back, claiming she suddenly remembered the door code. According to Stephen, she rushed back inside alone. Never see her out again. Stephen would later change his story, now claiming he had seen Sasha again, this time with an unfamiliar man. That detail shifted everything. Police needed to identify this unknown individual and quickly retraced Sasha's steps from the attic bar to her apartment. Detectives mapped out the 30-minute walk and reviewed hours of surveillance footage from that Friday night. In several clips, Sasha stood out in white jeans and a purple top. At one point, a street camera captured her with 2 other people. Hoping for answers, police issued a press release asking those individuals to come forward. It worked. The 2 women identified themselves and explained that they had found Sasha wandering alone, clearly intoxicated. She had no phone, no ID, and they were concerned. They decided to share an Uber with her to ensure she got home safely. Before reaching her destination, Sasha suddenly got out of the car when she saw Uptown Apartments and hurried toward the entrance. The women accompanying her followed to ensure she entered safely. However, When Sasha tried to access the building without her key fob, they encountered the security guard, Steven, who would not let her in without proper identification. While they were talking, another resident opened the door, allowing Sasha to enter. The women waited briefly with Steven before leaving once Sasha was inside. Up to that point, all statements were consistent, but investigators still needed to gather more information. Inside Sasha's apartment, police discovered her iPad, which was synced to her iPhone. This connection enabled them to recover messages from the night she died. One text sent at 5:12 a.m. read simply, "Ben." This was the last recorded activity on her devices. Ben was someone with whom Sasha had a casual relationship. He told police they had made tentative plans to meet that weekend and confirmed they had been texting that night. Ben cooperated by providing a DNA sample and was quickly ruled out as a suspect. His alibi was solid. Another man, who was a former boyfriend and remained close to Sasha, was interviewed. He had been working a shift at a bar the night she was killed, and this was confirmed by several witnesses. Like Ben, his DNA did not match any of the samples collected. Just days after Sasha's death, her family held a private funeral. It was a touching ceremony that honored her diverse heritage by incorporating Hindu, Islamic, and Christian traditions. One of her co-workers mentioned that it was only at the funeral that he realized how many lives Sasha had impacted. Meanwhile, the police accessed the off-site CCTV footage from Uptown Apartments and began reviewing it frame by frame. At 1:46 a.m., Sasha was captured on camera entering the building, followed closely by a man who briefly asked if she was okay before disappearing from view. Shortly after, Sasha was seen climbing the stairs toward her apartment and was not seen again. At 2:06 a.m., she reappeared on the footage, running up another flight of stairs, with security guard Steven following her, just as he had reported to the police. He stated that he walked with Sasha to the parking garage to check if her keys were in her car, but after she remembered her door code, they went back inside. However, something about the situation felt off. Detectives continued to analyze the surveillance footage for several hours after the incident. At 6:36 a.m., they noticed something important. Steven appeared on camera leaving the second floor with 2 large trash bags. He walked to the parking garage where his car was parked and returned to the building just 2 minutes later. Although he claimed his shift ended at 6 a.m., he did not actually leave until 6:39 a.m. Initially, investigators considered whether taking out the trash was part of his job, but building management confirmed it was not. Alarmingly, the trash bags Steven carried resembled those found in Sasha's apartment. With this information, police obtained a search warrant for Steven's home and requested that he take a polygraph test. The man who had been a helpful witness was now a suspect in a murder investigation. As the scrutiny intensified on Steven, investigators acted quickly. Although he appeared cooperative, his story began to fall apart during the polygraph test. When asked if he had ever entered Sasha's apartment, he denied it, but the polygraph results suggested otherwise. His body responses heightened significantly when he was questioned about Sasha's cause of death. The examiner asked if she had been poisoned, stabbed, or strangled. Steven denied all possibilities, but his heart rate escalated at the mention of strangulation. This was crucial evidence, as Sasha's cause of death had not been released to the public. There was no way Steven could have known she had been strangled unless he had been present at the scene. While polygraph results cannot be used in court, the inconsistencies prompted further investigation. At Steven's home, detectives discovered a pair of shoes that matched a footprint found in Sasha's bedroom. Days later, forensic analysis confirmed that a fingerprint taken from beneath Sasha's toilet seat belonged to Steven. Additionally, DNA found on her body, including on her chest, matched his as well. The situation deteriorated significantly. His phone history showed a concerning internet search conducted around 5 a.m. on the morning Sasha was killed. He had looked up how to override a quickset keypad lock, which is the type used on Sasha's apartment door. The timing of this search is particularly unsettling, occurring just minutes before Sasha sent her last message, a single-word text to her, "Ben." Steven also displayed signs of a struggle, including scratches and a bite mark on his arm. For the detectives, the evidence was becoming increasingly alarming. Stephen had turned into a serious threat. On October 21, 2015, just days after Sasha's murder, Orlando police made a significant announcement. Stephen was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, abuse battery, and burglary. He exploited his role as a security guard to target someone who was vulnerable and defenseless. Investigators believe he followed Sasha into her apartment while she was impaired, then overpowered and assaulted her. After abusively assaulting, strangling her, he attempted to clean up the scene using her household products and removed items from the apartment to dispose of them, including in trash bags that were captured on surveillance cameras. In November 2017, Stephen's trial commenced. His defense team sought to suppress evidence, arguing that his statements made during the polygraph were given under the assumption that he had to cooperate to avoid losing his license. They also requested to exclude important items, such as his shoes and recordings of his interviews. However, the judge denied their requests and allowed all the evidence, including the shoes and polygraph results, to be presented. Legal experts highlighted the importance of this ruling, noting that in a case based on circumstantial evidence, every detail is crucial, and the prosecution was gradually building a strong case. Stephen's assertion that he had never entered Sasha's apartment contradicted the forensic evidence, which included blood, fingerprints, DNA, matching footwear, and digital records, all of which undermined his story. As the trial progressed, the defense continued to raise objections and suggested they would seek to exclude more evidence, but the timeline was tightening. Jury selection was approaching, and once it started, there would be no turning back. The man responsible for the safety of Uptown Apartments residents now faced the consequences of his actions. For Sasha's family and friends, this marked the beginning of a long journey toward justice. During the trial of Stephen, his defense team focused on undermining the prosecution's case. Defense attorney raised several questions, such as why Stephen's clothing had not been tested for DNA and why the shoe prints found in Sasha's apartment were a size 9, while Stephen wore a size 10.5. They noted that there was no security footage of Stephen entering Sasha's apartment. However, the prosecution countered that the evidence's strength did not depend on video footage but rather on scientific findings. DNA from Stephen was found in Sasha's bedroom, and discrepancies in his timeline, along with surveillance footage of him carrying trash bags from her apartment, painted a troubling picture that did not need video proof to be persuasive. When asked about Sasha's injuries, the medical examiner mentioned that the abrasions on her lower body might have been caused by security belt during abuse. Stephen's defense even suggested that he and Sasha had consensual intimate and that someone else could have entered afterward to commit the murder. The prosecutor, however, firmly asserted the state's position. The evidence from the crime scene was undeniable. The trial lasted 7 days. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Stephen Duxbury guilty. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for Sasha Samsudian's murder, plus an additional 15 years for attempted abuse battery with force and burglary with assault. The judge ordered the sentences to be served consecutively. In a poignant moment, Sasha's parents expressed sympathy for Stephen's family, especially his mother, who sat quietly in the courtroom. However, their own grief was still very fresh. Sasha's mother expressed the profound loss, saying, "No future birthdays, no wedding day to prepare for. Every time she attend a wedding, she remember that they'll never have that for their daughter." The family's struggle continued even after the conviction of Stephen. The Samsudian family filed a civil lawsuit against Uptown Apartments, the security company Vital Security, Spectrum Brands, the manufacturer of the lock on Sasha's door. Their 102-page complaint stated that multiple complaints about Stephen's behavior had been overlooked, and that the keypad lock system he manipulated was known to be faulty. Their attorney emphasized that the lock could be easily compromised with a simple tool like a screwdriver, referencing articles that highlighted failures of the same lock model in other cases. However, the defense countered that there was no proof of a defect since the lock had not been preserved as evidence. It was thrown away by the unit owner after a new tenant moved in. In February 2019, Stephen appealed the court's decision not to allow him to suppress his statements and sought to overturn his conviction for attempted abuse battery. His appeal was rejected. Although justice had been served, the Samsudian family continued to experience deep grief. Her parents transformed their pain into action, collaborating with the Orange County Sheriff's Office to assist other families dealing with violent loss. After Sasha's death, her mother, who had been a trauma nurse, stepped back from her career to focus on supporting victims and survivors. She shared stories and listened to others through programs such as the annual Victims' Rights Breakfast. Sasha was not just a victim, she was a vibrant and passionate young woman who left a mark on everyone she met. One of her co-workers described her as a beautiful soul, noting her deep caring nature, easy laughter, and the positive impact she had wherever she went. Her family and friends continue to celebrate her life by keeping her kindness and spirit alive through their actions, advocacy, love. Her family's resilience transformed their grief into advocacy, channeling pain into purpose through partnerships with the Orange County Sheriff's Office to support victims of violent crime. Sasha, a radiant soul whose laughter and kindness touched countless lives, remains a beacon of inspiration. Her legacy endures in the love and actions of those who honor her memory, ensuring her spirit continues to shine brightly in a world she once illuminated. Chelsea King was born on July 2, 1992, in Poway, California. After her birth, her parents, Brent and Kelly King, faced some challenges. A medical error during childbirth resulted in Kelly developing Asherman syndrome, a condition in which scar tissue forms in the uterus or cervix. Despite these difficulties, Chelsea was very close to her family, especially her younger brother, and made a point to spend quality time with them. The King family moved frequently, first to the Bay Area in San Francisco, then to Naperville, Illinois, and finally settling in Poway, San Diego County, California. By 2007, Chelsea was a bright and cheerful student, earning an A grade in high school and maintaining a GPA of 3.2. She is a vegetarian who loves nature, as evident from her enjoyment of walking in the park. She and her friends even planned a cleanup of the Bernardo Ranch Community Park, which she visited on February 25, 2010. On that day, Chelsea left home at 6:15 a.m. and usually returned by 5 p.m. When 6 p.m. arrived without her return or any communication, her parents became concerned. They discovered her phone was turned off, prompting them to call her friends to check on her whereabouts. To their dismay, none of her friends knew her plans, and no one had seen her since she left school. This sparked fear in her parents. Chelsea's father, Brent, decided to track her phone through AT&T and discovered that it was near Bernardo Ranch Park. He immediately went there to search for her and found her car, with her school uniform and handbag in the back seat. Chelsea loved to run and frequently organized solo runs before returning home. However, she had recently lost consciousness during one of her jogs. Connecting the dots, Brent decided to call the police, fearing that his daughter might have fainted again while running and could be unable to seek help. The search for Chelsea involved not only the police but also support from the local community. They noticed disturbing similarities to a disappearance that had occurred the year before. The community quickly formed a volunteer group to support the King family. Her mother, Kelly, expressed deep gratitude, stating that their help was truly encouraging. Search teams, including dog handlers, helicopters, and volunteers on foot, scoured Chelsea's usual routes, the park, and the area around her home. During the search, some clues were discovered along the path, including her underwear and shoes. Forensic scientist Mary Schiffer examined blood found on the underwear, and DNA testing confirmed that it belonged to Chelsea. Additionally, shocking findings revealed the presence of biological fluid from a man on the underwear. This fluid was cross-referenced with police databases and matched to 31-year-old John Albert Gardner. John is also a suspect in another case, the disappearance of Amber Dubois, a 14-year-old girl. There were rumors in the community that Amber had run away with someone she met online. On February 13, 2009, 14-year-old Amber Dubois, from Escondido, California, went missing while heading to Escondido High School. Born on October 25, 1994, Amber lived with her mother, Carrie McGonigal, and her mother's boyfriend, David Cave, but she often spent weekends with her father, Mo Dubois. That day was cold and rainy, and Amber's classes typically ended around 2:45 p.m. She usually returned home about an hour after school. When she didn't come home, her parents grew concerned. David went to the school to pick her up, but the teacher informed him that she had not been there that day. Immediately, David and Carrie filed a missing person report, and the police in Escondido began to investigate. Friends and family joined the search, but there was no sign of Amber. Her parents felt a glimmer of hope when investigators revealed that her phone had been briefly activated. The police then urged all residents of Escondido to report any information they might have about Amber's whereabouts. Some individuals claimed to have seen Amber in the days before her disappearance. These accounts suggested that she might not have been kidnapped but could have run away. Despite that, her mother, Carrie, insisted that Amber would never voluntarily leave home, but she could not convince the authorities to agree with her opinion. Renaissance High School organized a search and rescue effort, in which officers and volunteers distributed flyers and searched the area for clues. David, who was the last person to communicate with Amber before she went missing, took a lie detector test 8 times, with all results coming back negative. Yet, Carrie continued to harbor suspicions about him. John Albert Gardner was born on April 9, 1979, in Culver City, California. Due to his father's alcoholism and his mother's long work hours, John often stayed with relatives who took care of him. He became close to his older cousins, Shannon and Serena. From a young age, John struggled with constant allergies, ear infections, and asthma, which made him restless and selective. As he got older, his behavior grew worse. By age 4, he had significant impulse control issues and needed medication at school to help him focus. He exhibited frequent outbursts of anger, spoke of self-harm, and expressed feelings of self-hatred. As his condition failed to improve, he became depressed, especially when he couldn't take his medication at night. In February 1989, John was hospitalized at UCLA, where he was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and emotional issues. Doctors observed that he tended to be aggressive toward peers and often lost control. At the age of 21, John assaulted a 30-year-old neighbor and faced charges for both the assault and abuse. Initially, he denied both allegations but later admitted to hitting the woman while maintaining that he did not abuse her. In 2000, he was convicted of the assault and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Throughout this time, he claimed to be a victim of the legal system despite substantial evidence against him. John's mother, Kathy Osborne, testified in court that her son attacked the woman because he believed she was in love with him and pleaded for him to receive psychiatric treatment instead of prison. The court denied her request, and he was sentenced to incarceration. John, 31 years old, saw a decline in his mental health and often considered self-harm. On February 19, 2010, he was taken to the hospital after consuming a large dose of the drug Prima, but he was discharged the same day. On the morning of February 24, 2010, John's mother, Kathy, drove for 2 hours to visit John's grandmother. They did not return home until 1 a.m. on February 25. John was not at home at the time and did not answer his mother's phone calls. He eventually returned home around 8 p.m., dirty and carrying a decapitated snake. John claimed that the snake had attacked him and that he had killed it, but he had a deep wound on his nose that did not resemble a snake bite. The following day, while at a nail salon, Kathy saw news about a girl named Chelsea King. Authorities had used DNA evidence to identify a suspect and quickly located John. He was arrested at a bar on the west shore of Lake Hodges. Despite his frantic claims of innocence, the police handcuffed him and took him to the station. When shown a photo of Chelsea, John insisted that he did not know her and mentioned that he had been drinking, which made it hard for him to provide clear answers. The detectives, however, noticed that he was not so intoxicated that he couldn't understand their questions. They detected alcohol on him and observed his muddy pants. John claimed he had fallen while walking to the bar and insisted he only knew Chelsea from the news. During the interrogation, his demeanor changed frequently, and he claimed he was a victim of false accusations, similar to a previous arrest in 1991. He even made a peculiar remark about being accused in the case of Amber's disappearance, which alarmed the detectives, as they hadn't mentioned Amber's name during the questioning about Chelsea. The investigators showed John a photo of Chelsea and asked him where her body was, but he insisted he didn't know anything. However, when they briefly left the room, John looked at Chelsea's photo and cursed under his breath. Frustrated by the lack of evidence, the detectives had to let him go. Soon after, a report surfaced about an attack on a girl the previous year involving a man who resembled John. On December 27, 2009, 22-year-old Candice Moncayo went for a jog around Lake Hodges. It was a nice day, and she completed her run around 10:30 a.m. At that moment, a tall stranger with brown hair approached her. He knocked her to the ground and used his weight to pin her down. Candice realized he intended to assault her, so she decided to fight back. She got up and elbowed him in the nose with enough force to possibly break it. Seizing the opportunity, she ran away and called 911. Although the police responded to the scene, they couldn't locate the attacker. Investigators suspect that a tall man with a broken nose may be involved, but they believe the incident is more likely to be a robbery than abuse. They are questioning Candice regarding Chelsea's case. They showed her a photo of John, and she immediately recognized him as her attacker. Nevertheless, John's mother, Kathy Osborne, completely denied all allegations against her son. Detectives hoped to persuade her to confess to John's crimes by informing her of his other offenses and the evidence they had. They stressed the urgency of finding Chelsea and warned that John posed a threat to others in the community. During an interview with a Justice Department agent, Kathy explained that John was on medication for his mental health, which helped him manage depression and panic attacks. She described him as kind-hearted, despite occasional outbursts of anger. On the day of the attack, he had gone for one of his regular walks, although she did not specify the location. After that, Kathy stopped providing further information. The investigators then circulated John's photo through various media outlets, leading to more witnesses coming forward with testimonies against him. Several claimed to have seen him following Chelsea during her jog, and some even reported that he spoke to them, making them feel uncomfortable. On March 2, 2010, FBI agents began searching for Chelsea using a boat on the south shore of Lake Hodges. During the search, they discovered blonde hair in the mud near the shore. Chelsea's body was ultimately found about 10 feet from where her shoe had been located earlier. Bad weather had previously hindered search efforts. After the discovery, authorities informed Chelsea's family about the tragic news. With the body found and John in custody, prosecutors announced they would pursue the death penalty against him. In response, John's attorneys worked to negotiate a plea deal. They reached an agreement with the San Diego prosecutor. John would assist in locating Amber's body in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. John honored his part of the deal and led investigators to Amber's remains, remaining surprisingly calm and even smoking cigarettes during the process. He indicated a shallow grave but admitted to discarding Amber's clothing and belongings. Ultimately, Amber's body was never found. However, a clump of hair identified as hers was discovered. Carrie, Mo, and David were summoned to the police station, where they learned that some of Amber's remains had been located, but not her entire body. The police and medical personnel could not provide a clear understanding of what had happened to Amber. It became clear that the investigations into Chelsea's and Amber's cases were being managed differently. In response, Amber's mother, Carrie, appeared on the talk show Larry King Live, expressing her frustration about not being updated on her daughter's case and directly urging John to confess to the crimes. After Carrie expressed her disappointment on Larry King's live show about not being informed regarding her daughter's disappearance, the district attorney notified Chelsea's family that John had pleaded guilty in order to avoid the death penalty. He admitted to committing crimes against Amber Dubois and Candice Moncayo. Chelsea's family was understandably upset, but they felt they had no choice but to accept the plea deal. The district attorney knew that publicly announcing John's escape from the death penalty would likely incite anger not only in San Diego but also throughout the state and the country. On April 25, 2010, Despite his lawyer's advice to stay silent, John chose to speak out. He asked the judge and his attorneys for permission to appear on TV to publicly apologize to the victims' families. He confessed to his crimes, expressed self-hatred, and conveyed regret for his actions. However, many people remained doubtful of his sincerity. In relation to these cases, a book titled Lost Girls, authored by Kathleen Rother, was published. When the author informed John about the book, he requested that she sign it, expressing his desire to officially confess to his crimes and seek forgiveness. The families of the victims were furious about John's actions. They pointed out that he had previously stated he did not understand remorse, making his attempt to apologize feel insincere. During the sentencing, despite his attorney's suggestion to remain composed, John became emotional. When Carrie, Mo, and David described Amber and her kind personality, John cried repeatedly. They looked him straight in the eye and said that he had taken away their beloved daughter, her bright future and her innocence. David hoped that John's prison experience would be unbearable due to his cellmates. Next, Chelsea's parents, Brent and Kelly, spoke about Chelsea, highlighting her positive impact on the world and her ability to see the goodness in others. According to them, she was always brave, while they considered John to be cowardly for hiding behind his mental illness. They believed he portrayed himself as a victim, even though he was fully aware of his cruel actions when he killed both girls. Brent and Kelly expressed their grief over losing all the memories they could have shared with Chelsea. Brent specifically described John as a monster and a sociopath unworthy of mercy. While they spoke, John looked down, crying, as if showing his regret. When it was Candace's turn to testify, she directed her question at John, asking how his nose had healed. This seemingly innocent question triggered a reaction in him. He growled, bared his teeth, and sat with a wild look on his face. At one point, John turned to his lawyer and claimed that Candace never hit him and was simply lying. In that moment, people saw the true John, not as a victim, but as a monster. During numerous discussions with investigators, he confessed to multiple other crimes, revealing that he had many more victims beyond Amber and Chelsea. He admitted to violently assaulting an escort several times and stalking women, although all of his attacks ultimately failed. Finally, he received 3 consecutive life sentences without the chance of parole. This case sparked outrage not only among residents of San Diego but also around the world, especially since John avoided the death penalty, raising concerns about the justice system. Chelsea's family, motivated to prevent others from going through what their daughter experienced, established the Chelsea Act. This legislation increases penalties, parole restrictions, and oversight for the most serious crimes. Under this act, individuals convicted of child abuse offenses face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Afterward, the residents of the city gathered for a candlelight vigil in memory of Amber and Chelsea, praying for their souls to find peace. Katrina Wright's Brow was originally from Germany. There, she met an American serviceman named Charles, and they fell in love and got married. After their wedding, Charles brought Katrina to the United States, where they settled in a small town called Ayer, Massachusetts, which had around 5,000 residents. Together, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After leaving the military, Charles worked at a local factory that made knives and surgical instruments, providing for the family while Katrina stayed at home as a housewife. Katrina and Charles enjoyed a long life together filled with happy moments. As their children grew up and started their own lives, Katrina remained active, social, and energetic. When her children visited on weekends, she joyfully danced and had fun with her daughter. It was often hard to find her at home. In contrast, Charles was quiet, reserved, and calm. In 1980, Katrina was on the verge of realizing her long-held dream. She wanted to return to Germany to see how her home country had changed and to visit relatives and friends with whom she had kept in touch through letters over the years. To make this trip possible, She saved money for a long time but was so anxious about the possibility of her savings being stolen that she carried a large amount of cash in an envelope with her everywhere she went. This included outings to local restaurants with friends and family. When they learned about her money-carrying habit, they were surprised and often questioned her reasoning. It seemed odd to them that Katrina wasn't afraid to walk around with so much cash, especially since it posed a risk to her safety. However, Katrina believed that leaving the money at home unattended was even riskier. She felt that if she kept cash, her travel savings would be safe. At 48 years old, she truly thought her concerns were unfounded, at least until May 21, 1980. On that day, as usual, Charles left for work around 7 a.m., while Katrina stayed home a bit longer before heading to her job. However, by 10 a.m., her colleagues began to worry because she had not arrived at work. This was unusual for her. They attempted to call her, but she didn't answer. They also couldn't reach Charles, as he was out of contact during his shift, and mobile phones had not yet been invented. To save time, her colleagues began contacting the couple's closest relatives whose phone numbers they had. They were able to reach the daughter-in-law who lived next door to Katrina. She agreed to check on Katrina. At 10:45, she went to the address. She knocked on the door and windows several times, but there was no response. Her calls went unanswered, and the windows were tightly covered. When she tried to get inside, she found the front door was unlocked. As soon as she opened the door, it was clear that a struggle had occurred in the house. In the kitchen, she found Katrina lying on the floor, bleeding and unresponsive. The room showed signs of a violent confrontation, with furniture, appliances, and books scattered all around. The sink was soaked with water and blood, creating a horrifying scene. The daughter-in-law immediately called 911 for help, hoping that Katrina could be saved. However, she was too scared to remain in the house and waited for emergency responders outside. Paramedics quickly arrived at the house but were unable to save Katrina, who had already died. Detectives were immediately on the scene to investigate the crime. It became clear that the likely killer knew Katrina, as evidenced by the violence of the attack and the fact that the windows and locks were undamaged. This suggested that Katrina either let the attacker in willingly or he had a key. The assault took place in the kitchen, where the attacker used water to wash something in the sink, likely his hands or face. The kitchen remained messy, with blood and water splattered around. A faint fingerprint was discovered on the screen, while a clearer print was found on a toaster lying on the floor. Additionally, several hairs were found clutched in Katrina's fist, likely pulled from the attacker during a struggle. Unfortunately, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy at that time, so investigators could only collect and store the evidence for future analysis. Forensic scientists focused on the fingerprints they found. An expert determined that Katrina had been attacked multiple times. The suspected murder weapon, a paring knife, was discovered in the trash under the sink. The murder occurred in the kitchen, and it was clear that the house had been ransacked. The victim, Katrina, had her jewelry stolen, along with an envelope containing money she had saved for a trip back to her homeland. Initially, law enforcement believed the motive behind the crime was the stolen money. However, Katrina was determined to keep her savings, which led her to fight back against the robber, resulting in her tragic death. The numerous stab wounds also suggested a possible personal motive. Investigators looked into Katrina's personal life but found no one who could commit such a violent act. She did not have any obvious enemies and was not vocal about having money in her home, with only her closest friends knowing about her savings. This limited circle led them to suspect her husband, Charles. They theorized that the murder might have taken place before he left for work around 7 a.m. Evidence linked the murder weapon, a knife, to Charles, as it was produced by the company where he worked. He acknowledged that this knife was often used in their kitchen. While many residents owned similar knives, the knife in question had been thoroughly cleaned, which raised suspicions. During the interrogation, Charles expressed deep sorrow over his wife's death. He had been married to her for decades and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. Still, the fact that the perpetrator used a kitchen knife instead of a premeditated weapon was unusual for such a crime. Despite his apparent distress, Charles was subjected to a polygraph test, which he passed. In addition to the numerous stab wounds, Katrina had suffered a blow to the head from a blunt object, likely a lamp found broken near her body in the kitchen. Ultimately, with the collection of fingerprints and blood samples from the scene and after questioning Charles, the police decided to send him home. From the beginning, he was hesitant to go home because it reminded him of the tragedy. In 1980, there were no specialized companies for crime scene cleanup, so he had to rely on his relatives for assistance. Consequently, Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law ended up cleaning the kitchen and removing blood from various surfaces. They also expressed their concerns to the authorities, who believed that Katrina's attacker might have been someone she knew personally. To understand what happened, they explored various possibilities. During their conversations, they recalled a 25-year-old man named Kenneth Walters. Born on August 16, 1953, Kenneth was 26 at the time of the crime. He comes from a large, troubled family. He lives near Katrina, and some of his relatives are facing legal troubles. Kenneth himself had a history of minor criminal offenses. Before reaching adulthood, he had been arrested for participating in a knife fight. Since it was his first offense, he received a fine and was required to perform community service. A few weeks prior to Katrina's death, Kenneth had attacked law enforcement officers. Although a trial was scheduled for the day she was murdered, he was released on bail beforehand. Kenneth worked as a cook at a restaurant that Katrina frequently visited to spend time with her friends and family. While she did not interact with him directly, he might have learned about her possessing a large sum of money, possibly by overhearing her conversations during his shifts. Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law informed the police of their suspicions regarding him. Law enforcement officers decided to investigate Kenneth as a potential suspect in the murder. They spoke with him, but he denied any involvement and did not show any typical signs of a murderer. However, his previous involvement in a knife fight raised suspicions against him. When the police interviewed Kenneth again, he provided a solid alibi, supported by documentation. He had a time card that clearly indicated the hours he worked at the restaurant, which confirmed his statement. His colleagues, who were on duty with him that night, also verified his alibi. Kenneth explained that he left home the night before at 10 p.m., worked the night shift, and did not leave the restaurant until around 9 a.m. the next morning. A friend drove him back home, where his girlfriend could also confirm his presence. He did not stay long at home. He quickly changed clothes, took a shower, and left. By 10 a.m., he was attending a court hearing related to an incident involving a police officer. Given his tight schedule, he simply did not have the opportunity to commit the crime before his court appearance. Kenneth dressed neatly and left for court, where he remained until 11 a.m. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant and stayed there until 12:30 p.m. When he got home, he encountered the police, who were canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with him, examined his clothes and body for any blood or scratches, finding none, which did not raise any suspicion. A forensic expert determined that the murder occurred around 7 a.m., likely soon after her husband Charles left for work. Detectives believed the crime could have taken place between 7 and 10:45 a.m., when the body was discovered. Given the limited time Kenneth had before the trial, it seemed unlikely that he could have committed the crime and escaped unnoticed. After verifying Kenneth's alibi, he was removed from the list of suspects due to a lack of evidence of criminal activity. However, investigators did not completely rule him out of the investigation as the case progressed, though they did not find any new evidence. Fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene did not match any in existing databases, which were not very advanced at that time. The investigation stalled for 2 years with little to no progress. During this time, a man named Robert Osborne contacted the police, claiming he had important information regarding Catherine's murder. However, he expected to receive a reward for his testimony. Detectives indicated that a reward could only be offered to someone providing valuable information that led to an arrest. Robert suggested that law enforcement should interview Kenneth's ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh. At the time of the call, Robert was dating Brenda and was familiar with Kenneth's situation. He claimed that Kenneth had confessed to the murder during a private conversation. By the time the police received this tip, Brenda had already broken up with Kenneth, who was living elsewhere. Brenda confirmed that at the time of Katrina's murder, she and Kenneth were living together. She described Kenneth as rude and cruel. Brenda had a daughter with him, and they were struggling financially. Following the advice of Robert, her new boyfriend, she decided to turn Kenneth in, hoping to receive a reward that would help her situation. According to Brenda, on the evening of May 20, 1980, Kenneth left their home around 10 p.m. to go to work at a restaurant. However, when they called the restaurant later, they found out that Kenneth had not arrived there at the expected time. Brenda was uncertain about what time Kenneth returned home or whether he had gone to the restaurant at all. The next morning, he came back with a deep, fresh scratch on his face that was still bleeding. When Brenda asked him about it, he replied that it was none of her business. He quickly changed his clothes, took a shower, and left for a court appointment. When Kenneth returned from court regarding an assault case, Brenda informed him that the police were already investigating at their home. Kenneth was very upset about this and told Brenda that if the police asked her about him, she should say he hadn't lived there for about a month. After the investigation stalled, they relocated and waited a bit to avoid drawing attention to their escape. Brenda attempted to inquire about the incident with Kenneth, but he brushed off her concerns, stating that it was none of her business. However, one night, while drunk, he revealed that he had interacted with a German woman to take her money. Kenneth's testimony was contradicted by his time card, which showed he arrived at work on time and left only at 9 a.m. Brenda's statements also conflicted with the fact that Kenneth spoke to the police when he returned home and had no visible scratches on his face. Brenda's suspicions seemed unfounded. She could simply be a scorned ex seeking revenge on Kenneth. To clarify the situation, she was offered a polygraph test, which she took and passed. The detectives then decided to conduct a further investigation into Kenneth's background. They found another ex-girlfriend who claimed that Kenneth had also confessed to murdering a German woman, whom he referred to casually. Despite this new testimony, there was still little evidence against him. The fingerprints found on the toaster and faucet in the kitchen where Katrina died did not match Kenneth. This investigation took place in 1982, before DNA testing was available. To eliminate any doubts, they compared Kenneth's blood type with the blood found at the scene, and they matched it. The detectives viewed this as solid evidence of Kenneth's guilt, despite the low accuracy of such comparisons. It appeared that the prosecutor was eager to close the case quickly and needed someone to blame. Given the personal nature of the crime and its brutality, the police decided to thoroughly search for a possible motive. Kenneth had a difficult childhood that significantly shaped his life. He harbored a long-standing dislike for Katrina, feeling resentful towards her and her children. They all grew up together, and Katrina's children often boasted about their pocket money, which upset Kenneth because his family struggled financially. One day, driven by frustration, Kenneth and his sister broke into Katrina's house, stealing sweets and money from her children's piggy bank. At that time, Kenneth was only 10 years old. Katrina was understandably furious and insisted on taking action against him for his unacceptable behavior. Then, Kenneth was taken from his family and placed in a juvenile correctional facility at age 10. There, he faced harsh conditions alongside older teens who had committed more serious offenses. Kenneth found this experience traumatic and rarely spoke about it, yet he held a deep resentment towards Katrina for her role in his imprisonment. Despite the hostility he faced from others, his sister, Betty Ann, supported him. Although she was younger, Betty was very close to Kenneth and always believed he was innocent. Despite Betty's support, Kenneth was arrested 2 years after Katrina's tragic death and charged with her murder. The hearing was set for 1983. Kenneth remained calm about the upcoming trial, confident in his alibi, which was supported by a timesheet. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. His former girlfriend, Brenda, testified against him, sharing even more information than before. She claimed to have been in close contact with a friend of Katrina's who had previously dated Kenneth. Catherine's friend stated that Kenneth had given her a ring a few months after Catherine's death. Upon seeing the ring, Brenda realized it resembled one she had seen on Katrina before the murder. Photos of the ring were presented as evidence during the trial. The prosecution utilized clever tactics and presented various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Kenneth's lawyer believed he had a good chance of avoiding a conviction and advised him not to testify in his own defense. However, when it was time to present evidence of Kenneth's innocence, the timesheet had mysteriously disappeared. Without it, and relying only on his family's claims that he was a good person, there was no substantial proof to support his innocence. Consequently, Kenneth Walters was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defense argued that Kenneth was fortunate that the state did not have the death penalty, otherwise, he would have faced execution. Kenneth maintained his innocence and requested a retrial, but only his sister Betty supported him. Others believed she was too emotionally attached and forgave him for his past mistakes. His history of wrongdoings influenced the jury's decision against him. Initially, his lawyer believed in his innocence and worked diligently to exonerate him. However, all appeals were denied. As time passed, the lawyer's enthusiasm dwindled. Kenneth lost the opportunity to have his case reconsidered and was left to serve a life sentence in prison. His family believed his imprisonment was due to his lack of financial resources. He could not afford a skilled lawyer. After all his appeals were turned down, no attorney wanted to take on his case. Kenneth accepted his fate, but Betty remained determined. She frequently visited him in prison and continued to believe in his innocence, steadfastly pursuing justice on his behalf. Kenneth had a difficult personality and frequently caused problems in prison, which made it hard for anyone to make excuses for his behavior. He even tried to end his life out of despair. During one visit, Betty was unable to see him because he was in solitary confinement after getting into a fight with another inmate. Once he was released from solitary, they were able to meet, and Betty had a heartfelt conversation with him, expressing her determination to help him get out of prison. Their trust in lawyers had faded, especially since many refused to take on Kenneth's case. Betty felt she could only rely on herself. At that time, she hadn't completed high school and lacked the necessary education. She had also divorced her husband, who had discouraged her from helping Kenneth. As a single mother of two, she worked as a waitress, struggling to support herself and her children, but she remained committed to helping Kenneth. Betty first focused on finishing high school and then enrolled in college. She managed to balance her night shifts as a waitress while raising her kids. Despite the challenges, her determination and strong feelings propelled her forward. Betty eventually became a lawyer, fully knowledgeable about Kenneth's case but puzzled about how his timesheet went missing. Additionally, she discovered that Brenda, who reported a large scratch on Kenneth's face the day Katrina was murdered, had lied, as Kenneth had been in court, then at a restaurant, and later speaking with detectives. Those reports did not mention any injuries on Kenneth. It was odd that no one else noticed the scratch. Detectives typically pay close attention to such details, especially since Kenneth was one of the suspects from the beginning. Betty continuously reviewed the evidence and found substantial confirmation of her suspicions. Furthermore, she learned that Brenda did not actually take a polygraph test. Instead, Brenda only passed a voice test, which can indicate lies but is less reliable than a polygraph. Kenneth successfully passed the lie detector test, which should have worked in his favor, but this detail was not mentioned during the trial. As Betty investigated the circumstances surrounding Kenneth's conviction, she increasingly realized that law enforcement had seemingly chosen him as a scapegoat. Brenda went to the police after realizing that Kenneth had received a life sentence and admitted that she had lied under pressure from Robert, who hoped to gain financially. She also desired revenge on her ex, Kenneth, and felt pressured by the police. Now, she regretted that her actions had led to an innocent man being imprisoned for life. Another ex-girlfriend also revealed that she testified against Kenneth due to pressure from a female police officer who had a personal bias against him and was intent on seeing him convicted. It wasn't until 1999 that Betty gained access to significant evidence, specifically DNA samples collected from the crime scene. She uncovered a box of documents and samples, including blood and hair, that had never been analyzed before. The examination revealed that the DNA from the crime scene did not match Kenneth's. However, both law enforcement and the public worked to prevent the case from being reopened, while Katrina's family strongly resisted any new investigation. In 2000, Betty successfully reached out to the Innocence Project, a group of lawyers dedicated to assisting wrongfully convicted individuals. This organization had a team of experts and the resources needed to conduct thorough investigations. Betty presented evidence proving Kenneth's innocence, convincing the project to take on his case. She also contacted a female police officer involved in the investigation, who had a questionable reputation and had previously compromised her credibility in another case. Many in law enforcement spoke poorly of her, raising suspicions that she had intentionally framed Kenneth and had not lost key evidence by chance. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the testimonies of Kenneth's former girlfriends were exposed, particularly regarding a ring that was shown to the jury. It was discovered that the ring had been sent to Germany and did not match the jewelry owned by Kenneth's ex-girlfriend. It was smaller and unsuitable for Katrina. Betty sought to find the ring to counter another piece of evidence against Kenneth. She learned that the ring had initials engraved on it that did not belong to Katrina. Ultimately, due to Betty's extensive efforts in uncovering these discrepancies, the case was reopened, and the prosecutor dropped the charges against Kenneth. After spending 18 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison, Kenneth was finally acquitted and became a free man. He was able to enjoy life again after being deprived of it for so long. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. On September 19, 2001, while visiting his brother's house, Kenneth decided to take a shortcut that required him to climb over a tall wall. He did not realize the wall on the other side was even higher. When he jumped from a height of 15 feet, he fell awkwardly, struck his head, and later died in the hospital. Betty, Kenneth's sister, remembered that those 6 months after his release were the happiest of his life. After so many years in prison, everything felt new to him. Even after his death, Betty continued to fight for justice. In 2004, she filed a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful imprisonment of Kenneth and the impact it had on their lives. By 2009, she successfully won the case, receiving $10.5 million in compensation. In this story, Katrina's murder case remains unsolved and often forgotten. The blood found at the crime scene was tested, but no matches were found in the police database. The identity of the person who brutally took her life remains unknown. Her family hopes that one day, the case will be solved. Addiction can completely dominate a person's mind and will, leading them to engage in disturbing, harmful behaviors. This dependency can stem from various sources, such as alcohol, banned substance, gambling, or even unhealthy relationships, and its impacts can be equally damaging. While some people eventually recognize that they have become trapped by their addictions, many others ignore the problem. Unfortunately, this denial often leads to a worsening situation. The tragic story of Donna Munda and Ghulam Munda is not an isolated case. In 2005, it sent shockwaves through the peaceful town of Hermitage. They was well known and admired by locals, almost like celebrities. Ghulam was a respected physician who owned his clinic, while Donna was exceptionally beautiful and nearly 24 years younger than him. To everyone who knew them, they appeared to have a perfect and successful relationship. However, on a warm day in May, a single gunshot shattered this facade, revealing a much darker reality marked by betrayal, dependency, and greed. Ghulam grew up in the slums of Gujarat, India. From a young age, he faced the harsh realities of poverty and hunger. These tough conditions shaped his strong character, motivated him to escape poverty and create a better life for himself. He worked hard, focused on excellence, and aspiring to become a doctor. After completing high school, Ghulam was accepted into a medical university, where he quickly became one of the top students. His hard work paid off when he was offered an internship at a prestigious clinic in the United States. There, he worked in the urology department and quickly gained a reputation as a promising young specialist with a bright future. After his internship, Ghulam received an attractive job offer and chose to remain in the U.S. He also began applying for U.S. citizenship. By the mid-1970s, he had moved to Hermitage, Pennsylvania, a small town with a population of just over 16,000. There, he opened his own clinic specializing in urological care. His career quickly flourished. Ghulam became a top professional, utilizing advanced technology and the latest equipment in his practice. His clinic gained a reputation as one of the best in the state. He accepted the most difficult and seemingly hopeless cases, attracting patients from both near and far, including overseas. Dr. Ghulam was well respected not only for his medical skills but also for his kindness. He frequently provided free medical care and often paid for expensive medications for patients who couldn't afford them. His compassion was rooted in his own challenging childhood, which motivated him to help others in need. With a prosperous medical practice, Ghulam enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. He purchased an opulent home in a prestigious area and embraced a life filled with enjoyment. He believed in making the most of life and investing in what made him happy, such as gourmet food, traveling, luxury watches, rare collectibles, high-end cars, and spending time with attractive companions. In his 40s, Ghulam was still single when he noticed a young woman named Donna walking down the street and fell for her immediately. Donna was 24 years younger than him. She came from a religious Catholic family and had just graduated from high school when she met him. At first, she was hesitant about his interest, but over time, she accepted his generous gifts and let him pursue her. Donna's family struggled financially and couldn't afford a prestigious college education. When Ghulam found out about her situation, he offered to pay for her tuition because she wanted to work in healthcare. He supported her journey to become a registered nurse and later funded her master's degree in anesthesiology. Donna and her partner's romantic, Ghulam, relationship started several years after their initial meeting. Interestingly, even though they had strong religious values, Donna's parents accepted their relationship. They appreciated the kind, generous doctor who had helped support their daughter's education and overall well-being. Donna later became a highly skilled nurse anesthetist, secured a job at a prominent medical center. Ghulam continued to encourage her ambitions, supported her career advancement. They lived in Ghulam's luxurious home, where he gave Donna to an expensive car, lavish jewelry, and trips to fancy vacation destinations. When Donna turned 30, Ghulam, who was 54 at the time, proposed to her, and she accepted. They celebrated their engagement with an extravagant wedding ceremony that had over 150 guests, including family, friends, and many of Ghulam's business associates. It appeared that they were on their way to a long, happy life together. Initially, everything seemed perfect. Donna and Ghulam gained fame as local celebrities and were probably the richest people in their town. They enjoyed a luxurious life, traveling frequently, and the doctor generously indulged his much younger wife. They frequently attended charity galas and was always spotted together at public events. Donna chose to prioritize her career and took her time before starting a family. Ghulam supported her decision without any pressure. Many saw Donna as cheerful, friendly, and lively, which was the image she projected, until tragedy struck, started to turn her life upside down. At 37 years old, Donna lost her father after a long illness, which hit her hard. She had always had a close bond with him, referring to herself as a daddy's girl and seeing him as her main source of strength. After he died, Donna became deeply depressed. She isolated herself from others. Ghulam did his best to support her, fulfilling all her wishes, including a trip to Hawaii to help her feel better. However, nothing seemed to work except for antidepressants, which she started taking in larger doses. Donna immersed herself in work, hoping to find solace in her daily routine, but it didn't truly alleviate her suffering. A few years later, she was diagnosed with a kidney condition that caused intense back pain. Even though her husband was a well-known urologist, he couldn't fully relieve her discomfort. The treatments only offered temporary relief, and her symptoms kept coming back, often worse than before. In her desperation, Donna started to rely heavily on strong pain medication. She began secretly taking doses from her workplace, where she was responsible for managing and administering medications. This made it easy for her to take small amounts without being noticed. She would quietly use portions meant for patients, just enough so that no one would realize. Together with her antidepressants, the prescription painkillers dulled her physical and emotional pain. Donna felt abandoned by the world and overwhelmed by her struggles. As a result, she began to distance herself from Ghulam, even though he genuinely cared for her. Things quickly deteriorated. She became increasingly dependent on her medications, to the point where she could not function without them. This led her to raise her dosages and steal more often. Eventually, her behavior attracted attention. She was caught in the act, and there was no way to deny it. Her dismissal from the clinic was shocking, and she faced multiple criminal charges. Ghulam quickly intervened to defend his wife, managed the situation to safeguard her reputation. Thanks to his actions, their friends and family never learned about Donna's problem. Rather than facing jail time, she paid a hefty fine and committed to rehabilitation at a specialized center. Ghulam chose the facility himself and organized Donna's stay, informing relatives, neighbors, and friends that she was on vacation. No one doubted him. He stayed calm, convincing, continued to appear cheerful and friendly. At the rehab center, Donna, who is now in her 40s, met a younger man named Damien Bradford, who was 23 years old. Damien had a history of multiple offenses for distributing illegal substances and ended up in rehab after a serious overdose that almost killed him. Despite their age difference, Donna and Damien quickly became very close, spent a lot of time together. They faced similar challenges. Although their relationship was unexpected, their bond deepened rapidly. What started as simple conversations turned into a passionate affair. Donna's husband was nearing 70 years old. Due to his age and health problems, their physical relationship had significantly diminished. In contrast, Damien was young, energetic, fit, and undeniably attractive. He dedicated a lot of time to the gym, often used steroids and various supplements to maintain his physique. It's unclear why Damien was attracted to a woman 2 decades his senior, but for Donna, he felt like a breath of fresh air, rekindling emotions she thought were long gone. She fully embraced this connection, quickly became emotionally invested. Even though the rehabilitation center had strict rules prohibiting romantic relationships among patients, the two secretly began dating. They found secluded spots to meet, such as storage rooms and restrooms. The thrill of being caught only seemed to strengthen their connection. Donna became so invested in the relationship that she couldn't envision her life without him. Their romance continued after they left the rehab facility. Damien was a caring partner who gave Donna plenty of attention, called her sweet names, and truly enjoyed making her feel valued. He may have developed genuine feelings for Donna, a sophisticated and self-assured woman who clearly looked after herself. At this point, Donna was not working anymore but had complete access to her husband's bank accounts and could spend as she pleased. Ghulam never scrutinized her spending or asked about her expenses. Taking advantage of this, Donna started showering Damien with lavish gifts, designer clothes, and accessories, while also covering all of his living expenses. She even rented a cozy apartment for them to meet privately. As a result, Damien became financially dependent on his wealthy partner, but neither of them appeared to have any concerns about it. When warned about his wife's affair, Ghulam had long suspected that something was off and noticed changes in Donna's behavior, but he had decided not to confront her about it. He realized that she was much younger and had emotional and physical needs that he could no longer fulfill. Gradually, he accepted that their passion had faded. Instead of reacting angrily, he calmly asked Donna if they should consider ending their relationship. Donna was shocked to learn that Ghulam knew about her affair. She explained that it was merely a temporary distraction that happened during a tough period in her life. She had met the younger man while in rehab, when she was feeling vulnerable and needed support. He seemed to understand her struggles better than anyone else. Despite this, she assured Ghulam that he was still the person she loved, promised to end her relationship with the younger man, emphasizing that he didn't truly matter to her. Ghulam felt moved by her words. He chose to trust her, forgave her, and decided they could move forward together as if nothing had happened. Damien had become Donna's overwhelming dependency, which she couldn't easily escape. She felt a strong attraction to him and, in his presence, experienced feelings of youth, desire, and genuine care. Her thoughts were focused on one main goal: eliminating the obstacle to her happiness, her husband. The affair continued at the apartment she had rented for Damien. Although they were more cautious now, Ghulam believed their relationship was over, while Donna planned to maintain it. When they couldn't meet in person, they stayed in constant contact, calling up to 20 times a day and exchanging hundreds of messages. Donna had no plans to let go of her boyfriend. Donna had selfish reasons for not wanting a divorce. She feared losing her financial stability. Before marrying Ghulam, they signed a prenuptial agreement that would limit her settlement to $250,000 if they separated. However, after Ghulam found out about her infidelity, he tried to keep the situation under control and offered to raise her settlement to $1 million. Donna turned down the offer, persuading Ghulam that she still loved him and wished to save their marriage. In reality, though, Ghulam's wealth had increased to nearly $12 million. Motivated by greed, Donna wanted everything, immediate access to wealth so she and Damien could live the way they wanted without restrictions. Every time they met, Donna portrayed Ghulam as a controlling tyrant who emotionally suffocated her and treated her like an object. She wanted Damien to see her husband as an enemy who deserved revenge for the emotional pain he supposedly caused her. Her manipulative stories worked well. A dark plan began to form in Donna's troubled mind, one she intended to execute with the help of her young lover. She believed that since Ghulam was much older and had several chronic health issues, his time was running out anyway. So, she thought, why not hasten the inevitable? To Donna, this seemed like the ideal solution. No one would disrupt her new life, and she would legally inherit all of Ghulam's assets, properties, and wealth as his surviving spouse. She shared her plan with Damien, offering him half of Ghulam's fortune in exchange for his help with a problem. Damien quickly agreed. The promise of a large payout clouded his judgment. Together, they began devising the crime. People who knew Ghulam were aware that he often carried a large amount of cash in his wallet. He frequently joked that anyone who tried to rob him would leave satisfied. Donna and Damien decided to exploit this, planning the crime to appear as a failed mugging that escalated into a tragic event. Developing the plan took nearly 2 months, as Donna and her accomplice carefully considered every detail to avoid mistakes. During this time, Donna portrayed the perfect devoted wife. She stayed close to her husband, accompanied him everywhere, and made sure no one suspected any issues in their marriage. Friends and neighbors genuinely thought they were a happy couple, and even Ghulam was convinced of it. Their initial attempt to execute the plan did not go well. Damien was meant to ambush Ghulam as he left the hospital and headed to his car in the parking lot. However, the area was crowded with people, prompting Damien to back out due to the fear of too many witnesses. It took them another month to devise a new strategy. This time, they aimed to attack on a deserted road where no one would be present to intervene. The plan was straightforward. Damien would follow their car at a safe distance, and Donna would stop at a designated location, pretending there was a medical emergency. They set the date for Friday, May 13, 2005. On that day, Dr. Ghulam planned to visit a neighboring state to look at a house he wanted to buy as a wedding gift for his nephew, Farrokh Munda. Donna offered to go with him, but her 72-year-old mother, Dorothy Smouse, who was visiting at the time, insisted on joining. Donna tried to talk her out of it, but Ghulam didn't see any issue with her coming along and agreed to let his mother-in-law participate. Damien, dressed entirely in black and wearing ski goggles to conceal his identity, waited in his car for a message from Donna indicating that their vehicle had left the house. Once he received the signal, he followed the predetermined route, maintaining a safe distance behind. After stopping to refuel, Donna took over driving to keep control over their timing. While traveling along a deserted highway, she pretended to feel ill and pulled over, claiming she needed to take some medication. At that moment, a black Volkswagen approached from behind. A man in ski goggles jumped out, ran to the passenger side where Ghulam was sitting, pointed a gun at him, and demanded his wallet. Ghulam complied without resistance, handed over his wallet. However, as soon as the attacker received the money, he shot Ghulam in the head and quickly returned to his vehicle, driving away rapidly. Ghulam died instantly from the gunshot. Donna then called emergency services, crying and screaming as she begged them to save her husband. She acted so convincingly like a distraught widow that, at first, no one suspected she could have been involved in the incident. Inconsistencies in the testimonies appeared quickly. Right from the initial interviews, it was evident that something was not right. Donna stated she didn't see the attacker or his vehicle, everything happened too quickly, and she was in shock. In contrast, her mother provided a different account. She claimed she saw both the shooter and the car clearly. According to her, the person who shot her son-in-law was a young black man driving a black Volkswagen. This assertion visibly upset Donna, who argued with her mother, insisting that she must have been mistaken. However, her mother remained firm and began to add more specific details. Donna contended that they had stopped the car because Ghulam requested it, while her mother claimed it was Donna who stopped the car, as illness. Investigators were also puzzled as to why the assailant only targeted one person while leaving two possible witnesses unharmed. 2 days after the incident, Dr. Ghulam's widow held a press conference where she answered reporters' questions with tears in her eyes. She made a heartfelt appeal to the public, urging anyone with information about the case to come forward and help with the investigation. Shortly after the press conference, the police received a phone call from a woman who claimed that Donna was actually the mastermind behind the incident and that she had been assisted by her lover, Damian Bradford. The caller also provided details such as the make and license plate number of Damian's car, as well as his home address. This caller considered herself to be Damian's fiancée. She had been closely monitoring the couple and shared all the information she had gathered. On the same day, police arrested Damian and searched his apartment. Although he had managed to get rid of the weapon, for some unknown reason, he kept the victim's wallet and brought it home. Inside the wallet, they found about $3,000 in cash, several bank cards belonging to Dr. Ghulam, and a photo of Donna. Authorities also discovered clothes with small blood stains that matched the doctor's. Damian was arrested and taken into custody. He mistakenly believed that his wealthy lover would help him and somehow secure his release. However, Donna, fearing for her own safety, chose to stay silent, hoping that all the blame would fall on Damian, especially since the evidence against him was overwhelming. When prosecutors told Damian that he might face the death penalty, he decided to cooperate with them in exchange for a shorter sentence. He disclosed the entire plan, provided text messages and documents, including evidence that Donna had purchased the car he was driving. In July 2007, Damian pleaded guilty to the crime and testified in court, explaining all the details of the scheme. Because he cooperated, he was sentenced to 17.5 years in prison. Donna was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on September 21, 2007, for the murder for hire conviction, with an additional 360 months to run concurrently on the remaining charges. Despite Donna's numerous appeals, the court upheld the original sentence. She is currently serving her sentence at the Tallahassee Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee, Florida. After being released on supervised release in 2020, Damian Bradford was arrested again on July 29, 2022, following an altercation with state police at the Franklin Mini Mart in Aliquippa. During his struggle with an officer, Bradford fired a shot at the officer, hitting him in the leg. Damian was convicted of attempted murder and aggravated assault on the officer, sentenced to 36.5 to 73 years in state prison in November 2023. In December of that year, the district court added a consecutive 10-year sentence for violating the terms of his supervised release. As of press time, Damian is serving his sentence at the Albion State Correctional Institution, located in Albion, Pennsylvania. The murder of Dr. Ghulam Munda on May 13, 2005, shattered the illusion of a perfect life in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, exposing a chilling tale of addiction and betrayal. Donna Munda, 23 years younger than her devoted husband, succumbed to a dependency on painkillers and an obsessive affair with Damian Bradford, leading her to orchestrate Ghulam's death for his $12 million estate. Ghulam's kindness and medical legacy endure in the community's memory, marked by tributes in 2025, while his tragic end serves as a stark warning of addiction's power to corrupt and destroy, urging greater vigilance to prevent such devastations. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Mary Stauffer. Mary was born in West Duluth, Minnesota, USA, and her family moved to the neighboring town of Hummontown when she was 10 years old. She had 3 siblings, all of whom graduated from a local school and planned to go to college. Mary attended college and graduated in 1965. She loved working with children and dreamed of teaching, a dream that came true when she got a job at a school. She is a math teacher. In her personal life, everything was also successful. She married a seminary graduate, Irv Stauffer. They were devout Baptists. They first went to the Philippines as missionaries in 1967, and the trip was successful. Mary taught in Minneapolis for a couple of years. Then they moved to Polk, Nebraska, where her husband was asked to become the pastor of a congregation. They dedicated themselves to serving the church there, where both of their children were born. In 1975, they returned to the Philippines to undertake a 4-year mission trip. There, they planted new churches on the islands and returned home to Minnesota in 1979. Mary was planning to go to the Philippines again, this time intending to take her children with her. A few days before the family was to leave for the Philippines, while they were in the suburbs of St. Paul, they were destined to meet a person who would turn their lives upside down. On May 16, 1980, the day began normally for 8-year-old Elizabeth and her mother, Mary. They arrived and parked near a hair salon on Cleveland Avenue. When they left the salon, they headed to their car. Mary immediately noticed a young man, who looked to be about 30, confidently approaching them from the direction of a busy intersection. He looked at them strangely, and Mary instinctively felt uncomfortable under his gaze, but she did not panic since they were in a busy area. This young man did not look particularly dangerous. He stood out because of his thick glasses. Mary assumed he was merely asking for directions or something similar. However, when he approached the car, he took a gun from his belt, placed it next to the hood, and demanded a ride. In horror, Mary was ready to give up the keys to the car that the church had given them if only he would let them go. But the criminal did not want the keys. He forced Mary and her daughter to sit in the front, demanded that she drive north. Mary tried to influence the attacker, calm him down, and persuade him to let them go. She convinced him that if there were any problems, he could turn to the church, which would not abandon its parishioners in trouble. Mary stoically remained calm, trying to soothe the kidnapper and even bribing him. However, all her efforts were in vain. She even turned to the Bible, but the kidnapper was clearly not ready to listen to the Holy Scriptures. He ordered them to be quiet and keep driving. When they stopped at the nearest intersection, a patrolman pulled up next to their car. The kidnapper threatened to kill Elizabeth if they went in the same direction as the policeman or gave him a signal. Mary was forced to change their route, and the kidnapper noticeably relaxed. They drove to a wooded area in Anoka, stopping at a deserted camping site. There, the attacker ordered them out of the car and deeper into the vegetation, cautiously looking around. He forced them into the trunk, tied the mother and daughter together, taped their mouths shut. He then got behind the wheel and drove into the countryside. There, he planned to pick up a spare tire for his van, placing it in a trunk right on top of the captives. At that moment, 2 neighborhood boys became curious about what was happening and came dangerously close. One stood in front of the car while the other, named Jason Wilkman, approached the trunk from behind. The little boy curiously looked at the wheel and seemed to notice something underneath it. The kidnappers saw Jason and panicked. Without thinking twice, he grabbed Jason and threw him into the trunk with the others. When Jason's friends saw what had happened, he immediately ran home to tell his family. The kidnapper chased after him but was too far behind to catch up. In a panic, he jumped behind the wheel and took off. Jason was crying, and Mary tried to talk to him, but he was too scared, could only tell her his name and age. She tried to calm the children down, and it worked. At least they stopped crying. The trip was short, but Mary heard them moving around in the rough terrain. Branches and bushes constantly hit the vehicle as the criminal drove deep into the forest for several kilometers. Here, he pulled Jason out of the trunk and took him away. A few minutes later, he returned alone, did not open the trunk, but simply got behind the wheel and drove away. Mary prayed that he would just let the innocent child go because she did not hear any shots, but gloomy thoughts crept into her mind. Mary's car was left in the bushes. It was hard to see because he was increasing the distance from the police. The kidnapper got into a black van without windows, along with Mary and her daughter. Before driving off, he double-checked the ropes on his captives, then returned to the city and took them to his electronics store, where he allowed them to use the toilet and gave them juice to drink. They stretched their limbs, which had gone numb. Mary tried to find out what he wanted, but instead of answering, he taped both their mouths shut again, tied them up, put them back in the van, and drove them to his family's house in a neighboring town. The small house was only 10 kilometers from the apartment where the Stauffer lived with their children. Nevertheless, Mary and daughter did not know where they were. They were mistaken while he wandered through many places. The criminal took both of them to the bedroom of the house, which was small, dark, and cramped. He removed the door handle and locked the door. Getting used to the darkness and looking around, Mary and her daughter realized they were in a kind of storage room filled with clothes, toys, but there was nothing that could help them. At the same time, Mary's husband, Irv, and her son, Steve, were waiting for the return of the mother and daughter from the beauty salon. They had a family dinner planned, and the last preparations were to be made before leaving. Both should have returned long ago, which began to worry the household. At 4:30 p.m., Irv called the salon, and the hairdresser confirmed that the visitors had left long ago but had no idea where they were going or what could have happened. Irv called his wife's friends, but they did not know where she might be. Then he turned to other members of the Baptist community and involved them in the search. They all called local hospitals, acquaintances, police stations, and even morgues to find the missing. When no information could be obtained, Irv contacted the police. However, from the very beginning, it was obvious that they suspected of himself of the disappearance of his wife. By that night, the authorities were already engaged in the search for a 6-year-old boy, Jason Wilkman. The search for Mary continued. Irv explained that he was not involved in the disappearance of his wife and daughter. He and his son were waiting for them at home and had no idea what happened after they left the hairdresser. But the authorities did not believe him and suspected he had done something to them. The next morning, a car was found. They even managed to find 2 sets of fingerprints on the steering wheel, but their owners were not in the police database. The car had no license plate, so investigators could not determine whose car it was. The area around the car began to be thoroughly searched. First of all, they found the car's license plate. It had been torn off when the criminal escaped through the bushes. Suspicions arose that Jason's abduction and the disappearance of Mary and her child could be connected. This helped them know that the car belonged to Mary. It seemed that everything was very serious, and the missing persons were in danger. About 300 police officers and volunteers were gathered to begin the search operation. Announcements were published featuring images of the missing. Based on the words of the boy's friend, a composite sketch of the kidnapper was created. From that moment on, the authorities' suspicions regarding Mary's husband only intensified. Ironically, the composite sketch bore a striking resemblance to him. Both he and the kidnapper were dark-haired, wore glasses. Irv became the main suspect in the disappearance of the 2 children and Mary. However, Irv provided an alibi supported by a photo and passed a lie detector test. His fingerprints did not match those found in the car, yet the authorities still did not want to clear him as a suspect. Irv continued to emphasize his innocence and pointed out that the investigation's misconceptions were leading them away from the real goals of the search operation. Before her first trip to the Philippines, Mary had taught at the school, and among her 9th grade students was Ming Sun Shiu, a teenager of Taiwanese American descent, with whom Mary had a good relationship. He showed great promise in sports and also had significant academic success. It seemed that the teenager had a great future ahead of him. Later, former students of Mary said that Ming was enamored with his math teacher. He thought she seemed smart and stately. After Mary went to the Philippines, she returned and moved to another city. Ming became truly obsessed with his teacher and constantly remembered her. He began to pursue his secret love, and it looked radical. Confusing the younger of Stauffer with his father, also named Irv, Ming showed up at Mary's in-laws house in Duluth on the 4th of July and held Irv Sr. at gunpoint. Ming took him into the house and told him to call his wife to the room. When Mary's mother-in-law entered, Ming realized his mistake. Ming claimed he was simply mistaken and threatened that if they went to the police, he would return and shoot them both, and then he ran away. The elderly couple had no idea that Ming was really interested in the younger Irv. They never reported it anywhere and didn't even tell the mayor and his son about the incident until they returned from the Philippines in 1979. No one had any idea who could have attacked the families, neither the motive nor the goals were known. Mary only found out that the attack was carried out by Ming when he had already taken her and her daughter prisoner. He proudly told her about it before attacking her. Mary had no idea that he had been spying on the family from the forest, which was located not far from the house where they settled. Probably, he decided to attack because he saw preparations for departure and understood that soon they could leave again for a long time. Shortly before the kidnapping, Ming even tried to get through the doors of the patio, but nothing came of it. Later, he attempted to get through the storage room and drilled several holes. Burr found sawdust and removed it, but he still did not understand the relevance of their appearance. Now everything fell into place. In the meantime, the captives experienced the hospitality of the criminal. Immediately after the kidnapping, Ming admitted that Mary was lucky that her family was not nearby during the surprise attack, as he was ready to do anything to take her, even kill everyone. The next day after the kidnapping, he pulled Mary out of the closet, spread a blanket on the floor in the living room, tied her up. After that, he made a 3-hour video interview in which he revealed his identity. Mary remembered Ming when he spoke about math lessons at school. He reminded her that he was the student she had failed in exams. Mary immediately recalled who he was but could not understand what he meant. He told her that he couldn't get an academic scholarship because of her, as his parents had died, and he couldn't afford to go to college because of that. After losing his place in school, he was drafted into the Vietnam War, which led him to a prison camp where he experienced some tough times. He blamed Mary for all of this. Now, he wanted to make her pay. There was one flaw in this tragic story: Ming had made it all up. Mary remembered perfectly well that he graduated from high school with excellent marks, so he could easily have received a scholarship to any college. In reality, he attended the University of Minnesota and graduated from there. He never served in the army and instead immediately opened his own store. Mary realized that his story was a lie designed to impose a sense of guilt and manipulate her. In fact, Ming lived in a fictional world. He wrote fantasy stories about many women whom he abused, and after that, they begged him to be with them. Among these fantasies was his 9th grade math teacher. During a video interview, he revealed his intent not to cause physical pain but to inflict emotional trauma so that she would feel dirty, humiliated, and insulted. The footage included more than 6 hours of assaults. Over the next few days, a friend of Ming returned a borrowed camera but kept the tape of the torture. He abused Mary daily. Ming claimed he was not a pedophile. He never abused Elizabeth, nor did he force her to watch the torture of her mother, although he repeatedly threatened to do so. Unfortunately, this did not mean that Beth would remain on the sidelines of his villainous fantasies. Elizabeth turned out to be a pawn in his fictional stories. Ming demanded that Mary show love, but she refused because she was a believer and a devoted wife who had promised to love only her husband. To force she to submit, he threatened to place her daughter in a thick plastic bag and tie it shut, claiming that it would take 4 to 5 minutes for Beth to inhale all the oxygen, after which she would die. He also threatened to kill all the members of her family one by one until Mary obeyed. Mary was forced to meet him halfway. She kissed him on the cheek, feigning love, but this was not enough. Only a kiss on the lips calmed him down. Then he removed the bag from her daughter's head. Later, during a similar incident, he left Elizabeth in his van for 4 hours. This happened on a hot summer day, and in the scorching sun, the girl miraculously did not die. This experience finally convinced Mary of the need to obey him, otherwise, they would be in trouble. In the meantime, their family continued to hope that they would see both Mary and Elizabeth alive. Weeks went by, and according to statistics, the probability of the missing returning after such a long period was practically zero. After 2 weeks, the police called Irv and reported that they had found a woman's body in the forest, which was presumed to be Mary's. He provided his wife's dental records and was relieved to learn that it was not her, and therefore, there was still hope for the safe return of both his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, life in captivity continued. After some time, Ming softened the strict rules of the internal regulations. He allowed his captive to eat in the kitchen, take a shower on the 10th day, even gave Elizabeth several board games and a TV. He began to affectionately call her Betty. Despite the circumstances, this looked very unpleasant. During this period, Ming forced Mary to write 2 letters to her husband. In the first letter, she was to convince the police that she had not disappeared but had simply run away from her hated husband, whom she no longer loved. In the second letter, he voiced demands that the police stop their interference, or else no one would ever see either of them again. Ming still led a double life. He was involved in business management and worked in his electronics store as if nothing had happened. From the outside, it seemed that he was quite decent and that his life was completely ordinary. In reality, he was a kidnapper and a murderer. After 3 weeks, Ming took a rented mobile home and went with his victims to the fair in Chicago. Before that, they stopped at a shopping center in Madison, Wisconsin, to change clothes, as they had been wearing their old clothes since the abduction. Both victims were under close watch from him. He would not allow them to escape. He kept one of the 2 by his side, and in case of escape, he promised to kill the other. This was how he was able to grant them some relative freedom of movement, albeit within reasonable limits. Despite all of Mary's efforts to warn the police by using a receipt from her bag while shopping, the bank was notified and, unfortunately, the FBI never received the information. It apparently got lost. When Elizabeth was left unattended for a while in a shopping mall, she attempted to tell a group of teenagers that something had been stolen, but they just laughed and walked away, not believing her story. By the end of this little trip, all 3 even stopped by the University of Minnesota campus to watch fireworks. During this time, at least 3 police cars drove past them. However, Mary knew that the criminal had a gun with him, and she feared that he might harm them without thinking twice if she called for help. So she remained silent, despite her hopes. On July 7, 1980, Mary and Elizabeth faced serious difficulties. Ming realized that he could not remain in his house forever without being noticed. Therefore, he decided to buy a mobile home for the 3 of them, making it clear that he intended to continue this madness and wanted to eliminate any possibility of being caught. Mary understood that there might not be any other chances to escape, so she planned to wait for him to leave for work before trying to free herself. The next morning, Ming went to work as usual, and Mary began her fight for freedom. She managed to muster enough strength to remove the heavy door from its hinges, from which the captive's shackles were attached. Until that moment, they had been unable to do this. Suddenly, she heard some noise and feared that Ming had returned. Mary was instantly frightened. She acted quickly and returned everything to its original state, as if they were still tied up. They seemed to sit and listen forever until finally, they calmed down, realizing that Ming was gone. The nervous tension played a cruel joke on them, but the situation did not improve because precious time had been lost. Mary had no idea when their tormentor would return. She got to the phone and called the county sheriff's office. She was put on hold twice before finally contacting the detective who was leading the search for the 3 missing people. Thanks to a tag from a dry cleaner, she provided the address where she and her daughter live. Mary was most shocked by the policeman's question about whether Jason was with them. It was then that she realized that the child had never returned home and was probably killed in that forest during a stop. In fear of Ming's return, they simply hid in the storage room, afraid that their tormentor would soon come back. Fortunately, the police arrived before long, and the mother and daughter were freed. Both victims were photographed, having remained shackled with bicycle cables for almost 2 months. FBI agents went to Ming's shop, searches were conducted, and the criminal was arrested without resistance. A few days later, Mary went north to visit her family. Her happy release from captivity, along with her daughter, became a real sensation. However, In reality, their misadventures were not over yet. Just a few days after being incarcerated, Ming hired a killer. It turned out to be a cellmate, Richard Green, who was about to be released from prison. He asked Green to commit the murder of Mary and Elizabeth so that they could not testify against him. Additionally, Green was supposed to help Ming escape from prison in exchange for a promise of $50,000 once the job was done. As an advance, he handed over a check for $1,000. Fortunately, this plot failed, and the criminal was caught. Richard did not admit that he was hired. This was only discovered during a second interrogation and after checking the financial transactions. The prosecutor's office had more than enough evidence to build a strong case. The jury ultimately viewed a 3-hour interview that fully revealed Ming's insidious plan. The hearing was a tense moment for all involved. The mayor had to walk between the prosecution and defense tables. As soon as she asked Mary the first question, Ming jumped up and attacked the mayor. However, the prosecutor blocked his path. The guards knocked him down and immobilized him. The hearing lasted 10 days, after which Ming was found guilty of kidnapping. Difficulties arose even before the hearing began. He confessed to one of the psychiatrists who worked with him that he knew where the body of Jason Wilkman. He was then offered a plea bargain. The authorities agreed to reduce the charge to second-degree murder. In late October, Ming led the police to the boy's body. Jason had died from blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted from behind. Ultimately, Ming Sen Shiu was sentenced to life in prison but retained the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mary then had to testify again as a material witness in the trial for Jason's murder. It seemed that this terrible story was about to end. However, this time Ming was prepared for the meeting. He secretly brought a knife into the courtroom. During cross-examination, when Mary was answering questions, he jumped up from his chair, grabbed her by the neck from behind, and took her hostage, holding the blade near her throat. Fortunately, there was a policeman behind who managed to snatch the knife away and prevent the murder. As a result, Mary suffered a cut that went through her chin and the corner of her mouth, requiring 62 stitches. The second trial was postponed. As part of a plea bargain, Ming confessed to the kidnapping and second-degree murder of Jason, after which he was sentenced to 40 years in prison, with the terms of the sentences to be served concurrently. The case of this dangerous criminal was again in the spotlight. In 2010, the judge ruled that, in the case of parole, Ming Sen would be sent to undergo a state program for individuals who have committed violent abuse crimes. According to the judge, Ming met the criteria for criminals who require life imprisonment. After many hours of evaluating psychiatric reports, it was decided that he posed a permanent threat to society. For Mary, this decision came as a great relief, as Ming had openly declared to Beth, and then the entire family, that if he were ever released, he would come for them. Curiously, Ming's business was estimated by experts to be worth about $250,000. The Stauffer family filed a civil suit against him as compensation for illegal restriction of freedom and emotional distress. However, upon hearing about this, Mary declared that the right to seek justice belonged only to the Lord God, and she refused to pursue the case. After all these events, Mary repeatedly stated that despite all the evil this man caused, she continues to pray for him. Ming Sen Shiu is currently being held at the medium-security federal prison in Marion, Illinois. The ordeal of Mary Stauffer and her daughter Elizabeth stands as a chilling testament to the depths of obsession and the fragility of ordinary life. Yet, through nearly 2 months of unimaginable torment, Mary's unwavering faith and courage not only secured their escape but also illuminated a path of resilience for her family. The tragic death of Jason Wilkman and the scars left on the Stauffers underscore the devastating ripple effects of one individual's malice. Decades later, with Ming confined and deemed a perpetual danger, Mary's choice to forgive and pray for her captor reflects a profound strength that transcends vengeance. Her story endures as both a sobering warning of unchecked obsession and an inspiring reminder that even in the face of profound evil, hope, faith, and the human spirit can prevail. Joanna Simpson was born in 1964. Her wealthy family lived in York, Yorkshire, UK, where she spent most of her childhood. Joanna attended an all-girls primary school and completed several grades before her family decided to move. The Simpsons relocated to Laxey on the Isle of Man after her father sold his construction company. After finishing local school, Joanna went to Oxford High School and then pursued business studies at Bath University. She was quite popular among her peers, was known as a well-mannered, kind, and optimistic girl. She willingly supported everyone she communicated with, which attracted people to her. Fellow students always crowded around her, eager to spend time together. Naturally, there were always young people in this group who were looking for her attention. Despite this, Joanna was more focused on her work and career. She wanted to establish herself before starting a family. She decided to get married in 1994 when she turned 30. Her husband also came from a wealthy family. Together, they bought a large house in Ascot, which was in a derelict state and required significant repairs. At that time, they did not have children, so the choice of such a large house seemed excessive to some. They lived there alone, not far from Windsor, where the royal family's castle was located. Additionally, Legoland was nearby, making this location appear to be a great option for expanding the family. However, Joanna was in no hurry to do so. She planned to convert part of the house into a guest house so that relatives and friends could visit often. Her husband supported her aspirations, but perhaps he wanted to have children. After 3 years of marriage, her husband decided to end their relationship. It seemed that this decision stemmed from his disappointment over not having children. Joanna was shocked by this decision. Her friends noticed how depressed she had become and wanted to help her. One of her close friends was a senior flight attendant and had a flight planned to South Africa. She invited Joanna to accompany her, hoping that a change of scenery would help Joanna regain her spirits. Joanna agreed. As it turned out, this decision was fateful. During the flight, she met a man named Robert Brown, who was the pilot of the British Airways airline on which she was traveling. Robert was an avid runner. He had been a British cross-country champion 3 times, which he was very proud of. It seemed they had a lot in common, and an affair began. Joanna retained ownership of the house after her first marriage, as she had invested most of the money into it. She and her new lover moved in together in September 1998. They began to think about marriage. By Christmas, Robert proposed. When everything happened so quickly, Joanna was usually more cautious, but not this time. After getting engaged, they married in February 1999. This rush surprised many, including Joanna's parents, who had only seen Robert a few times by that point. They did not have a good impression of him, believing he was too arrogant and unable to offer their daughter the love she deserved. However, it was futile to dissuade Joanna. She was independent and old enough to make her own decisions. The only thing her parents could do was encourage her to draft a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. The Simpsons believed this relationship might end quickly and did not want their daughter to worry about a potential divorce or risk losing part of her property. The newlyweds did not want to attract too much attention or organize an overly lavish ceremony. Afterward, they immediately traveled to South Africa, the country where they had first met. Joanna hoped to have an unforgettable honeymoon, but within the first few days of the trip, she began to doubt the soundness of her choice. Robert treated the hotel staff with such arrogance that Joanna felt uncomfortable. She had never witnessed her partner behaving so rudely before. After returning from her honeymoon, Joanna called her mother to express her worries. She admitted she was questioning her decision to marry Robert, realizing she didn't know him well enough. She was disturbed by his behavior during the honeymoon and feared his rudeness might eventually be directed at her. Although she began to see her marriage as a mistake, Joanna didn't end the relationship right away after returning from South Africa. She still hoped she could change him. This decision was likely influenced by the pregnancy she discovered after the trip. Like many women, she believed that having a baby would encourage Robert to become more attentive and caring as a father. However, Robert's actions seemed to indicate otherwise, undermining her hopes. Instead of becoming more considerate when he learned that his wife was pregnant, he grew even ruder and more disrespectful. This negative behavior also affected her relatives and friends. Joanna, however, did not want a divorce because she feared that their child would grow up without a father, which she thought would be a major problem. When their first son, Alex, was born, things changed only slightly. A few months later, Joanna became pregnant again and gave birth to their daughter, Katie, but this second child did not improve Robert's behavior. Although he did not physically harm Joanna, which may have prevented a breakup, their family and friends could see how much he was psychologically hurting her. Robert was toxic and rude to Joanna's family, friends, which caused her a lot of distress. Over time, their differences became more apparent. It was clear they should not have been together. Joanna recognized this, but their children made it difficult for them to separate. After the birth of her first child, she often said their marriage would not last and that divorce was unavoidable. She tried to endure the situation for 8 years, but eventually realized she couldn't continue like this. Her final decision came after her husband revealed his disturbing thoughts, including violent fantasies about harming her and their children. He contemplating end one's own life by crashing a plane. Feeling terrified, Joanna filed for divorce in 2007. From that moment on, Robert's behavior worsened significantly. He began to openly express his strong dislike for Joanna's loved ones and even for Joanna herself. He started to manipulate her by hinting at the possibility of end one's own life. When that tactic failed, he began making indirect threats about harming Joanna and their children. Joanna was uncertain about whether to take his words seriously or see them as mere manipulation. She suspected that Robert was fabricating these threats to pressure her into withdrawing her divorce application. He told his friends that he didn't want to distance himself from the children. However, due to his job, which required him to travel frequently, he often spent weeks abroad, leaving little opportunity for him to connect with them. Despite his negative feelings about the separation, Robert never changed his behavior in a way that would make Joanna reconsider her decision to divorce. After Joanna filed for divorce, they continued to live together for a few months. An incident later made Joanna realize that her decision was justified. One evening, while they were putting their children to bed, a conflict erupted. Robert falsely accused Joanna of cheating, a claim he regularly made without any evidence. Joanna, who was fully committed to caring for their children, had no time for an affair. She attempted to defend herself, but her efforts seemed in vain. The argument escalated in the kitchen, and at one point, Robert grabbed a knife, confronted her. He even pressed the blade against her throat, threatening to harm her. Despite the serious situation, Joanna remained composed. She explained that any desire to harm her was illogical because her husband knew she was a good mother. Killing her would leave their children without either parent. Joanna pointed out that if Robert acted violently, he would likely face imprisonment. Eventually, she persuaded him to put down the knife. The following day, Joanna shared the incident with her mother and some friends. They all agreed she should report it to the police because it was a serious matter. They observed that Robert's behavior had become erratic and dangerous since she filed for divorce. Joanna was worried that if she reported her husband, it would negatively affect their children, so she wanted to avoid putting them under that stress. She thought the situation would improve on its own. After his aggressive outburst, she spoke to him again and made it clear that their relationship could not be repaired. He accepted this reality. Now, Joanna insisted that Robert move out of her house because she felt that living together could be unsafe for everyone. However, he refused to leave, saying he would not change his residence. Robert enjoyed living in a large house and a comfortable lifestyle. They even offered him money to help him buy an apartment, but he remained steadfast in his decision. Many believed he was holding out for a better financial offer since Joanna came from a wealthy background. Robert was offered progressively larger sums of money until he finally agreed to move out. This decision brought Joanna relief. She no longer felt threatened. They shared custody of their children, and Joanna was waiting for the divorce to be finalized. However, a heated argument erupted over how to divide their house. Despite their prenuptial agreement, Robert refused to give up the property. Unfortunately, they still had to communicate about visits with their son and daughter. They lived apart, and Robert even started dating a flight attendant from his job. Not long into their relationship, she got pregnant. Joanna initially thought this was good news, believing it would help Robert move on from her, but she was mistaken. On November 1, 2010, one of Joanna's close friends received a call from her children's school because Joanna's kids had not shown up. The teachers tried to reach Joanna but could not get a response. They eventually contacted her friend, who was unsure of Joanna's whereabouts. Joanna had planned to fly to the island of Man to visit her parents, leaving uncertainty about when she vanished or what had happened to the children, 9 and 10-year-olds. After receiving a call from the school, Joanna's friend reached out to her mother. The mother mentioned that Joanna should have returned to Ascot after their trip to Isle of Man. Although she hadn't talked to Joanna on her return day, the call made her anxious, so she attempted to contact her daughter. To her dismay, there was no response. Unable to locate Joanna, they decided to notify the police. By this time, Robert had already arranged a meeting with law enforcement, an appointment to discuss a serious family incident in which he was involved. After reviewing the statements, the detectives decided to visit the home of Joanna to check. When they arrived, no one was there. Their repeated knocking went unanswered. The officers chose to force the door open to gain entry. Once inside, they quickly spotted suspicious stains in the hallway that appeared to be blood. Despite a thorough search, they found no evidence of Joanna. There were no signs of anyone, including the children. The police left the house without any leads and returned to the station, where they awaited Robert's arrival for the scheduled meeting. When he arrived, he oddly refused to answer any questions about his wife. This was surprising as he had originally contacted the police and requested the meeting. Due to Joanna's ongoing disappearance, the decision was made to arrest Robert. They intended to conduct a more detailed search of the large property where Joanna lived. The situation remained puzzling, and they were not in a rush to file charges against him. The authorities started searching the entire area while also talking to Joanna's family. They all insisted that she couldn't have simply vanished and had no intention of taking her children anywhere. However, Joanna's relatives expressed negative views about Robert, convinced that he was the only one who could be involved in her disappearance. On the first day of the search, the only verified information was that Robert had taken the children to his brother's house. Joanna's family found some comfort in knowing that Alex and Katie were safe. On November 2, 2010, Robert was questioned again. Whenever the detectives asked him about the events of October 31st, he mostly responded without elaborating. The police then changed their strategy and started discussing everyday topics, which made him more engaged. He excitedly talked about his passion for running. However, when the conversation turned to Joanna, he became withdrawn and anxious. He described his marriage with her but focused on criticizing her, calling her a spoiled child, trying to cast her in a negative light. He repeatedly pointed out that Joanna and her family were financially stable, suggested that they did not understand the struggles of earning money. By the end of the conversation, the police felt that Robert disliked her, particularly because the Simpsons were wealthier than he was. Robert grew up in a modest family in Edinburgh. His father worked at the docks, and his mother was employed by a bank. While they managed their finances well and met their needs, they were not as financially secure as Joanna's family. Robert, a pilot earning around £150,000 a year, had few reasons to complain about his life. Still, he often expressed dissatisfaction with his situation. The detective spent a considerable amount of time discussing various abstract topics with Robert, during which he was quite talkative. However, when they inquired about Joanna and the events of October 31st, he repeatedly said he had no comment. When the detectives expressed confusion, Robert explained that he was experiencing a mental blockage, making it difficult for him to answer those questions. Despite their persistent efforts to encourage him to speak, the detectives were unable to get any more information, forcing them to continue their investigation elsewhere. Joanna's house was extensively searched, revealing additional blood in the living room and in various spots in the courtyard and driveway. The arrangement of the bloodstains indicated that her body might have been relocated. All samples were gathered for testing, which later verified that the blood matched Joanna's. Authorities suspected that Robert had murdered his ex-wife, but the reason for his alleged crime was still unclear. 3 years after their breakup, Robert had begun a new life with another woman. Despite this, he expressed concern for Joanna's financial situation. He had signed a prenuptial agreement, which meant he was not obligated to worry about her finances after their divorce and would not receive any financial support. However, it became clear that Joanna had not been transparent about her family's financial status. Even after they separated, Robert occasionally returned to her home while she was away. He persuaded his children to provide him with a new security code for the alarm system, granting him unrestricted access to the house. Robert's main focus was on his ex-wife's financial documents. He became fixated on the belief that Joanna had significant amounts of money in different accounts. At one point, his imagination ran wild, leading him to believe she possessed up to 25 million British pound, which he thought he could claim if it weren't for their prenuptial agreement. Historically, the British legal system did not recognize these agreements, leading to inevitable legal disputes. However, starting from October 20, 2010, prenuptial agreements began to be acknowledged without extra bureaucratic hurdles. As a result, in the case of a divorce, Robert would not be able to claim any of his wife's wealth, and he was aware of this reality. The next court hearing for the divorce case was set for November 8, 2007, and it seemed likely to be their final meeting before the marriage was officially ended. This context may explain why Robert chose to confront his wife a week earlier. On Sunday, October 31st, Alex and Katie spent the whole day with their father. He was supposed to bring them back to their mother, Joanna, who had been eagerly preparing for their return. She missed them and had baked a chocolate cake as well as made their favorite dish. Joanna usually invited a friend to join her for such occasions because she felt uneasy being alone with her ex, but this time her friend couldn't make it, leaving Joanna to welcome Alex and Katie by herself. The police spoke to the children of Joanna, who provided key details about the situation. The argument between the parents started when Robert returned Alex and Katie to their mother around 4 p.m. Although the children were in a different room and couldn't see what was happening, they heard sounds that seemed like physical violence, described as dull thuds. After a while, the noises stopped. Then, Robert carried Joanna out of the room and placed her in the trunk of his car. He told the children that their mother had fallen and was hurt, so he needed to take her to the hospital. After closing the trunk, he instructed Alex and Katie to get in the car, drove them to his new girlfriend's home, where they stayed. Robert left them there and did not come back until around 7 p.m. When he returned, Joanna was not with him. He avoided answering Alex's questions directly. It became clear that Robert's actions during the 3 hours he was unaccounted for were a mystery, as was Joanna's whereabouts. Later, the police interviewed Robert again, but his answers remained the same. He was questioned a total of 9 times and never mentioned October 31st or anything about his ex-wife. After the final interview, he asked to speak privately with his lawyer. They went into a separate office. About 20 minutes later, his lawyer returned and read a statement in which Robert admitted to killing his ex-wife. Robert explained that he and Joanna had been arguing over their children's education. At one point, he lost control, remembered hitting her several times before deciding to take the children home and rush Joanna away. However, after, he realized that Joanna had already died. In a panic, Robert decided to dump the body and hide it in the woods. His explanation didn't seem credible because Robert could have immediately taken his wife to the hospital. It was also unclear why he chose to hide her in the trunk instead of placing Joanna in the car. It appeared that Robert recognized that Joanna was dead and wanted to shield the children from the sight of their mother, so he concealed her in the trunk. He eventually agreed to lead the investigators to the location where he had hidden Joanna's body. They indeed discovered the body of Joanna at the spot he indicated. It was clear that without Robert's confession, finding the body would have been nearly impossible. He took great care in transporting Joanna several kilometers away from the closest road and into the thick, secluded, near Legoland Windsor woods. There, he dug a deep hole, carefully leveled it, and covered it with leaves to hide any trace of what had happened. The police did not believe Robert because the hole was very deep and showed no signs of freshly dug soil. They estimated that he would have had to remove about 400 kilograms of soil beforehand, which would have taken a significant amount of time. Additionally, the ground was already frozen, making it even more challenging to dig. Given these factors, it seemed impossible that he could have done all this in just 3 hours, and they suspected he had disposed of the soil elsewhere. This suggested he had likely dug a grave in advance, supporting the theory of a carefully planned murder. They found Simpson's body in a black bag inside a plastic box buried underground. Later, Alex and Katie visited the site to lay flowers in memory of their mother. They mentioned they knew the area well and even had a secret hideout nearby. The last time they were there was during the holidays when they were visiting their father. It was likely during that time that he began digging a hole for his ex-wife while the children played in their hideout. Robert continued to assert that he did not plan Joanna's murder. He claimed it was an accident, stating that the stress from a lengthy and challenging divorce caused him to lose control. His lawyer argued that he acted out of passion, which could lead to a lighter sentence for him. However, a forensic examination revealed that Joanna sustained at least 14 blows to the head with a blunt object. The weapon, a hammer with a nail puller, was found at the site where her body was buried. If Robert had not intended to kill her, why did he bring the murder weapon into the house? He later explained that he took the hammer from his shed and secretly placed it in his daughter's backpack, but he could not provide a reason for this. Furthermore, other items discovered with the hammer, such as a protective suit, plastic shoe covers, and rubber gloves, suggested he had planned the crime. After the murder, he removed the CCTV unit from the house along with the hammer and disposed of both, indicating that he had carefully prepared for the act and behaved quite rationally. On May 11, 2011, Brown appeared at Reading Crown Court for a 10-day trial. He denied murdering Joanna but pleaded guilty to manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. The defense presented a psychiatric report indicating that Brown was experiencing a psychotic disorder when he killed her. Initially, a defense psychiatrist diagnosed him with stress-related adjustment disorder. The psychiatrist explained to the jury that significant stressors in Brown's life, including a difficult divorce, contributed to this condition, leading to mental and emotional instability that affected his self-control. However, Philip Joseph, a forensic psychiatrist for the prosecution, disagreed with the defense's assessment. After meeting with Brown in prison, Joseph described him as an intelligent man and a resilient person. He characterized Brown as a controlled person and noted that if Brown were unable to handle stress, it would be challenging for him to continue working as an airline pilot. On the first day of the trial, one of Joanna's friends gave evidence regarding a previous knife incident, when Brown had stabbed Joanna in the chest. In court, Brown denied that this had happened. The trial concluded on May 24. On the murder charge, the jury returned a not guilty verdict. Robert Brown was convicted of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 26 years in prison, including 2 years for obstructing a police investigation. Simpson's family and friends described the failure to convict of murder as a miscarriage of justice. Robert is eligible for mid-term release, with the remainder of his sentence suspended and monitored by the National Probation Service. In March 2023, as Robert could have been released in early November, Simpson's family and friends launched a campaign against it, citing the Police, Crime, Sentencing in Courts Act 2022. This act allows the Attorney General to block the release of any prisoner they believe poses a serious risk to the public. The campaign received support from former Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland, former Home Secretary Priti Patel, Jess Phillips, the then Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding, and Carrie Johnson, an anti-domestic violence campaigner and wife of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. On October 10, Justice Minister Alex Chalk KCMP announced that Robert would not be automatically released from prison but would instead be referred to the parole board. Robert challenged this decision in the High Court, but he was unsuccessful, arguing that Chalk had overturned a decision made by the judge at the original trial. Try to turn pain into strength. Joanna's mother and friend Hetty Barkworth Nanton was awarded a CBE in the 2024 New Year Honors for services to those affected by domestic violence and murder. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery: the case of the Milkin family. In the quiet neighborhood near Forbes Lake in Kirkland, Washington, the Milkin family exemplified the American dream. Their home was filled with love, laughter, and the joy of a well-established life. The head of the family is Leonid Milkin, a sergeant in the Washington National Guard. His journey began in 1989 when he and his family emigrated from Ukraine, seeking a new beginning in the United States. By 2006, Leonid was stationed in Iraq, bravely confronting the challenges of war. Despite the distance, his heart remained with his family, and he eagerly counted down the 6 weeks until he could return home. He was deeply supported and cherished by his wife, Olga. Born on July 22, 1977, Olga is a professional dental assistant in Bellevue. She skillfully balanced her career with raising their 2 young sons, was known by neighbors for her friendly and welcoming nature. Olga and Leonid have 2 sons, Justin, who is 5 years old, and Andrew, who is 3 years old. They bring joy and energy to the home. Justin was very proud of his father, and often told people that he was in the military. Both boys were loved very much, and their aunt, who is Olga's younger sister, often showered them with special affection. At 24, Lyubov Botvina, Olga's younger sister, was full of ambition and kindness. She was a sophomore at Seattle Pacific University, studying for a bachelor's degree in foreign languages. She often visited the Milkin family to spend time with her nephews, Andrew and Justin. The Milkin family's journey from Ukraine to the United States was challenging. However, with resilience and a love for life, they managed to rebuild their lives from scratch. They settled in Mill Creek, Washington, and became vital members of the local Russian-Ukrainian community. Their home was a warm refuge filled with love, dreams, and a blend of cultures, a place where their past and future were harmoniously connected. Tragically, on July 17, 2006, their story took a horrific turn when an unimaginable incident shattered their world. After firefighters extinguished the fire and entered the ruins of the house, they discovered the bodies. However, these individuals did not die from the fire. The cause of their deaths remains a mystery. They had been stabbed multiple times, sustaining serious injuries. Someone had done this on purpose to make them suffer. The police quickly identified their main suspect, shocking the entire neighborhood. Connor Skierman, a 24-year-old man who had recently moved across the street from the Milkin family just 2 weeks prior, came under suspicion. Witnesses reported seeing him trespassing on their property while carrying a red gasoline container shortly before the fire broke out. The most disturbing detail was the deep scratches on his face, suggesting he had engaged in a struggle, possibly with someone desperate to escape his actions. Connor was arrested on July 19, just 2 days after the murders. During questioning, he confessed to starting the fire but claimed to have no memory of the murders themselves. He said he passed out from drinking too much alcohol that night, specifically 3 bottles of vodka. He only remembered waking up in the Milkin family's house, surrounded by dead bodies. So who was Connor Skierman? He was born in Bellevue, Washington, and before the tragic incident, he appeared to be an ordinary neighbor. However, beneath this facade lay a criminal with dark intentions. He had kept logs of the Milkin family and plotted their demise. Later investigations revealed CCTV footage of him purchasing items to start a fire. Was this act motivated by hatred or a manifestation of a deeper monstrosity within him? This question would linger in the minds of many for years. Before the murders, Connor had no notable criminal history. His violent actions on July 17, 2006, stunned the community, resulting in his arrest and conviction for killing Olga, her 2 young sons, Justin and Andrew, and Lyubov. Connor acknowledged that he showered in Olga's home, changed into the hospital scrubs he found there, and bought gasoline to intentionally set the house on fire in order to conceal his involvement. However, he consistently denied committing the murders. Instead, he pleaded with the jury to trust him. Despite his claims, the evidence against him was overwhelming. When investigators examined the tragedy within the Milkin family, they meticulously collected the necessary evidence to charge Connor. Although the fire destroyed much at the scene, several key discoveries were still made. Among the burnt debris of the Milkin home, a blood-stained hunting knife was found at the bottom of the stairs. This knife was identified as the weapon used in the attack on Olga, Justin, Andrew, and Lyubov. In the master bedroom, where Olga and Lyubov's bodies were discovered, investigators uncovered clothing soaked in blood. This clothing provided DNA evidence that directly linked Connor to the scene of the crime. Additionally, a flashlight located in the same bedroom suggested that the attack was premeditated. A glove, partially burned in the fire, was found near the victims. This item not only placed Connor at the scene but also showed that he attempted to hide his fingerprints during the brutal attack on the family. Furthermore, security camera footage showed Connor buying gasoline from a nearby station shortly before the fire was reported. This evidence supported the timeline and his intention to destroy evidence by igniting the house. During Connor's arrest, officers noted fresh cuts and scratches on his face and neck, consistent with defensive wounds inflicted by the victims during their struggle, further connecting him to the crime. The conclusion was both horrifying and clear. This was not an accident or a drunken mistake. It was a planned massacre, a cold-blooded crime carried out with brutal intent. 3 years later, Connor Skierman's trial began. Selecting the jury took several weeks because the death penalty was a possibility. The prosecutors claimed that Connor had planned the attack, entering the home armed with the intention to kill. They argued that he had brutally murdered an entire family and then attempted to destroy the evidence by setting fire to the house. Connor's defense team focused on a different angle. They argued that he had been in an alcohol-induced blackout. They brought in addiction specialists, psychiatrists, and toxicologists to support their claim that Connor was too intoxicated to have intended to kill anyone and that he couldn't remember the murders due to his blacked-out state. However, the jury did not find this argument convincing. During the sentencing phase, Connor took the stand to give a 25-minute emotional statement. He pleaded with the jury for mercy, apologized to the Milkin family, and admitted to setting the house on fire, but he did not confess to the murders. He appeared subdued, with a face showing regret and anxiety. As he spoke, his voice trembled, and he frequently wiped away tears with a tissue, struggling to stay composed while also conveying his remorse through his slumped posture. During his speech, Connor avoided discussing the details of the crimes, following legal advice and the rules that allow defendants in death penalty cases to talk without being cross-examined. Instead, he concentrated on expressing his regret and the effect that his potential execution would have on his family. However, his words fell short. As he spoke, the Milkin family remained silent, their faces expressing a mixture of emotions, pain, anger, and perhaps a desire for closure. Olga's husband, Leonid Milkin, who was serving in Iraq when the murders occurred, listened closely, but his feelings were hard to read. The pain he endured was unimaginable, and now he had to confront the man responsible for his loss. Connor's defense attorney, James Conroy, argued that Connor was a troubled man who was struggling with alcoholism. He claimed that during the murder, Connor experienced memory loss due to the effects of alcohol. However, the jury found this explanation unconvincing, which led to the guilty verdicts. In this pivotal moment, Conroy hoped that Connor's display of remorse might influence the jury to show mercy. The prosecution, led by King County Deputy Prosecutor Scott O'Toole, presented a contrasting narrative. They portrayed Connor as a calculated murderer who broke into the Milkin family's home and committed horrific acts. The evidence clearly indicated the premeditated nature of his crime. O'Toole emphasized the profound grief of the Milkin family, particularly the innocence of the young boys, Justin and Andrew, whose lives were tragically taken by Connor. As Connor finished his statement, he stared intently at the jury, his eyes expressing desperation. He stated that people had told him that he was going to die and go to hell, adding that he was already there, his voice choked with emotion. After these final remarks, he returned to his seat, leaving the jury to process the heavy burden of his words and the seriousness of their imminent decision. The courtroom fell silent as the jurors contemplated what they had just heard. The decision ahead of them was significant, balancing justice, societal expectations, and the remnants of mercy that Connor's plea aimed to evoke. Many lives are at stake, not just Connor's, but those of others who will forever be affected by his actions. In the days that followed, the jury would deliberate, each member grappling with their conscience, the law, and the emotional testimonies shared during the trial. Connor's statement added a personal element to their responsibilities, humanizing a man found guilty of horrific crimes. Their verdict would determine not just Connor's future, but would also resonate through the lives of the victims' families, the Ukrainian community, and the larger conversation about justice and redemption. Everyone was focused on the jury, anticipating a verdict that would serve justice for the victims. The prosecution pointed to several factors to underscore the gravity of the charges: the multiple victims, with 4 people killed at the same time, their vulnerability, given the young ages of Justin and Andrew, which highlighted the victims' helplessness, and the attempt to conceal the crime, with arson being seen as part of a plan to destroy evidence and cover up the murder. Connor was found guilty of intentionally setting fire to the Milkin residence after the murders, indicating that the murders were premeditated. The prosecution claimed that the fire was a deliberate action to eliminate evidence and obstruct the investigation. On April 12, 2010, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict: guilty on all charges, which included 4 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree arson. Connor was found guilty of 4 separate counts, each representing a victim: Olga Milkin, Justin Milkin, Andrew Milkin, and Lyubov Botvina. The penalty phase of the trial lasted 2 weeks and was filled with strong emotions. After a day and a half of deliberation, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. On May 5, 2010, Judge Gregory Canova of the King County Superior Court officially sentenced Connor to death by lethal injection. As the sentence was announced, Connor allegedly shook his head in disbelief, while Leonid felt a sense of relief that justice had been served. Connor's defense team promptly announced plans to appeal the conviction to the Washington State Supreme Court, citing issues with jury selection and comments made by the prosecution during the trial. Connor's family, who were present at the sentencing, chose not to speak to the media. King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg addressed reporters at a press conference, stating that the death penalty is the law in the state and is reserved for the worst crimes. Satterberg, who was not in office when the death penalty was sought against Connor, praised the prosecution team for successfully presenting the case to the jury, which he believed made the right decision. He expressed sympathy for the victims, mentioning that they were wonderful people whose American dream had been tragically shattered. In 2018, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional, citing its inconsistent application and potential racial biases. This landmark decision resulted in all death sentences in the state being commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Consequently, Connor's death sentence was changed to life imprisonment without parole. Despite facing significant challenges, the Kirkland community came together to support Leonid Milkin. During this difficult time, he found his neighbors ready to help him fight for his rights and rebuild his home. Local veterans and volunteers led the rebuilding efforts, while companies generously donated materials and labor. Together, they transformed the site of tragedy into a hopeful home, symbolizing resilience in the face of injustice caused by a man who disrupted their lives. Leonid, a sergeant, had come to the United States to provide a better life for his family, but after the tragedy, he was left to rebuild his life on his own. By 2010, 4 years after the murders, he was preparing to move back into his reconstructed home. He viewed it as both a memorial to his lost family and a fresh start for his future. He now lives there, carrying with him the memories of his 2 sons and beloved wife, still questioning why his peaceful life was taken from him. The Milkin family massacre remains one of the most horrific crimes in Washington's history, a tragedy that shattered a family and deeply impacted the community. What do you think? Did justice truly prevail, or did Connor evade the punishment he deserved? Let's discuss. If you're interested in more cases like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next exploration of true crime's darkest stories. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jamie Stice. On April 12, 2011, in the small town of Morgantown, Kentucky, with a population of 2,500, 30-year-old Kathy Coy unexpectedly went into labor while driving. She had to give birth in her car on the side of the road, close to her home. Kathy had little time to call her friend, Shelley Lindsay, to inform her that she was about to give birth and needed help. When Shelley arrived, she was in the back seat of the car, covered in blood and holding her newborn. Sadly, the joy of becoming a mother was short-lived. Kathy noticed that the baby was having trouble breathing, so Shelley quickly called emergency services and drove them to the medical center. Kathy's hopes of motherhood were overshadowed by a grim situation. The doctors were very concerned. The baby's condition was critical. He was taken urgently to the intensive care unit due to breathing difficulties and a low body temperature, known as cold shock, which can be life-threatening. The doctors were not only worried about the newborn but also had concerns for Kathy and her family's emotional state during this crisis. The police arrived to investigate the situation. They went to the home where Kathy's children from a previous marriage lived with their grandmother. Officers spoke with the eldest daughter, 11-year-old Brianna, and her grandmother. The children expressed surprise at their mother's new baby, as they did not believe she was pregnant. They mentioned that she intended to meet with a friend who was also pregnant, but no one knew the friend's name. The situation seemed suspicious. Detectives accessed Kathy's social media account and identified a friend of hers, 21-year-old Jamie Stice, who was pregnant. The police attempted to reach Jamie but were unable to make contact. The detectives subsequently reached out to Jamie's mother, Jeannie. She informed them that her daughter was in the final stages of pregnancy and that she hadn't heard from Jamie since 9:30 that morning. Concerned, she was contemplating reporting her daughter as missing but realized that the police might not act quickly since not enough time had passed. While the investigation was ongoing, detectives spoke with Kathy again to clarify the timeline of the incident from that day. Kathy confirmed that she had given birth. She explained that she had woken up early, saw her husband Shannon off to work around 4:30 a.m., and then left to meet her friend Jamie around 10 a.m. After their meeting, as she was returning home, she began to feel contractions. Kathy stopped at a restaurant to grab a quick bite but felt the need to leave in a hurry. Realizing she wouldn't reach the hospital in time, she called her closest friend for assistance. Shelley, Kathy's friend, recounted that when she received the call for help, she rushed outside and saw Kathy in the back seat of a car. Kathy was not wearing pants, only a bloody shirt, and she held a baby in her arms, who was also covered in blood, as if he had just been born. Shelley noticed the placenta and recognized that her friend needed urgent help, especially since the baby was struggling to breathe. She quickly got into her car and drove to the medical center. Shelley observed that the baby was covered in grass and dirt but assumed he had fallen and gotten dirty in the car. There was no time to learn more. Her priority was supporting the newborn. Both women's accounts were largely similar, with one key difference. Kathy claimed that Shelley delivered the baby, while Shelley denied this. The situation was chaotic, with Kathy in labor crying out, and both her and the baby's conditions creating confusion. While doctors worked to assist the baby, Kathy pleaded with them to save his life. There were concerns about whether the situation was staged, leading to the decision to take Kathy in for questioning at the station. At that time, Kathy had already been examined by doctors, and her condition seemed stable. However, when the police began questioning her about her friend Jamie on social media, her story started to change. Initially, she claimed that she had only briefly met Jamie before ending their friendship. Kathy explained that she had driven Jamie to the Social Security office, dropped her off near the building, and then Jamie had left in an unknown direction. At that point, Kathy began to experience contractions, which forced her to leave abruptly. This part of her story raised doubts. To support her new version, Kathy presented a message from Jamie, which allegedly asked her to pick Jamie up from the Social Security office, a request Kathy refused due to complications in their story. However, when detectives expressed their disbelief, Kathy's narrative shifted again. Now, Kathy stated that she had picked up Jamie and taken her home, but Jamie was so exhausted that she collapsed on the sofa. Kathy claimed her contractions only started after this encounter. The significant changes in her story seemed implausible, but she attributed them to the stress of the emergency situation. Detectives aimed to determine the truth about how Kathy and Jamie met. Jamie's mother, Jeannie, stated that they had known each other for only a couple of months after connecting through social media. Jamie is pregnant with a baby. When asked about Kathy's relationship with Jamie, Kathy claimed she had known Jamie for only a few weeks and had been introduced through a mutual friend while seeking help with housing issues. At this point, inconsistencies regarding their acquaintance and its purpose emerged. Kathy couldn't even name this mutual friend, even though Jamie was 20 weeks pregnant, aligning with her due date, which raised further suspicion. Kathy was later informed that something significant might have occurred around 10:30 a.m., right after their meeting. Jamie was missing, and detectives informed the parents that they could not reach out to her. They encouraged Kathy to assist in the search. At this point, they were already skeptical about whether the baby truly belonged to Kathy. Kathy's husband, Shannon, arrived at the station. He was thrilled that his wife had finally given birth, but was confused about why she was being held and questioned. Shannon informed the police that Kathy had experienced miscarriages in the past, which had led her to struggle with depression. Despite the challenges, she remained hopeful about becoming pregnant again and starting a family. He feared that if their efforts failed, their relationship might end. For a woman desperate to become a mother, the thought of losing her husband could push her to desperate actions, even to the point of harming another woman. It was possible that Kathy had pretended to be pregnant to keep her husband with her. Additionally, her friend Shelley, who took her to the hospital during labor, might have played a role in this situation. Kathy frequently visited Shelley and shared stories about her pregnancy, but it was unclear whether Shelley supported Kathy's deception, suspected her, or had unwittingly assisted in a crime. Shelley told the detectives that she had never faced such accusations before. However, during the investigation, it became clear that she was involved in several aspects of the deception. For instance, after Kathy returned from a gynecologist appointment where she learned she was not pregnant, Shelley pretended to be a nurse. Kathy feared that this news could push her husband to leave her, so she asked Shelley to call him, posing as a nurse who confirmed her pregnancy. Shelley claimed she had no idea that Kathy was pretending to be pregnant or plotting anything deceitful. She believed everything was genuine and was genuinely happy for her friend. Kathy managed to convince Shelley, using various excuses, that pregnancy came with complications and that Shelley's support could help save her marriage. Up until the end, Shelley truly believed that Kathy would soon give birth. However, not everyone shares the same perspective as Shelley. When the police spoke to Kathy's other friends and her husband's relatives, it became clear that there had been a lot of discussion about Kathy's situation over the past 6 months. Many people suspected that she had been deceitful. For example, her mother-in-law often tried to reach out to her, hoping to find out the truth. She believes that Kathy is merely trying to deceive everyone, especially Shannon, to bind him to herself. The mother-in-law was very frustrated with Kathy's behavior and discussed it with her son, Shannon. For a short time, he listened to her concerns. A lot of suspicion arose from the continuous delays in the expected due date. The situation dragged on for so long that it started to seem unrealistic, as Kathy herself had no clear idea of when she would give birth. Witnesses noted that over the past few months, her belly has sometimes appeared smaller and then larger. By late 2011, the mother-in-law was convinced that Kathy was lying and was simply afraid of losing Shannon. She managed to persuade her son by highlighting that his wife was clearly deceiving him. He began to demand proof of the pregnancy, which led to even more elaborate deceptions. To maintain the ruse, Kathy stole an ultrasound photo during a visit. This image helped convince her husband, but it was not the only tactic she used. After stealing the ultrasound photo, Shannon is overjoyed about his wife's pregnancy. However, if the truth were revealed, their relationship would be over. His mother insisted that her son had been deceived. In the face of growing doubts, Shannon demanded more proof. His wife was well prepared and even managed to show him a video of their baby's heartbeat, which she had downloaded from the internet. Shannon was repeatedly misled. His mother was disappointed but unaware of the depths of the deception. She simply didn't know Kathy well enough. As the due date approached, Kathy needed more than just a friend acting as a nurse, a video, and a stolen ultrasound photo. After Jamie's disappearance, the photo was used to convince the police and medical staff that Kathy had given birth to the boy. As they contemplated the situation, a troubling image formed in their minds of how Kathy could have acquired the baby and why his mother, Jamie, was missing. Meanwhile, Kathy was already in an interrogation room at the local police station. Despite being stubborn and refusing to admit anything, she continued to provide confused and conflicting testimony, changing her story with each new detail the police revealed. There was no longer any doubt about her dishonesty, but they needed a confession. It was time to employ some tactics. They decided to leave her in the interrogation room alone for a while. This clever move aimed to see how she would respond and what attempts she would make to extricate herself from the situation. The plan worked, but not in the way they had anticipated. Kathy suddenly grabbed her mobile phone and called an unfamiliar number, pretending to talk to Jamie. When the detectives returned, she mentioned it, but she still couldn't provide any information about Jamie. A check on the phone number revealed that she hadn't actually called Jamie at all. The detectives quickly confirmed that there was no doubt that the boy Kathy had brought to the hospital was Jamie's child. DNA testing confirmed this connection. Although the detectives continued to act confidently, Kathy began to waver in her story. Unfortunately, she still refused to acknowledge what had happened to Jamie. The police informed Kathy that witnesses had seen Jamie get into her car alone that morning, and no one saw her come back, contradicting Kathy's claims. They tried to determine where Kathy had taken Jamie. Why was she holding the baby? Doctors noted that the baby's breathing issues and hypothermia were not accidental. He had been born less than an hour before arriving at the medical center, and his airways were still filled with fluid. Kathy seemed overwhelmed and unsure of how to help him, which caused the baby's condition to worsen. Once these facts were revealed, Kathy presented a new version of her story. Kathy revealed that about 9 months before the current incident, she had visited the hospital and learned from the doctor that she had suffered another miscarriage. After leaving the clinic, she encountered a woman named Ashley, who suggested that she could buy a child for $550 that was expected to be born to Jamie, but insisted they would need to wait until the boy was born. Kathy agreed right away and paid, hoping this would help save her marriage. Afterward, she pretended to be pregnant to maintain the deception while waiting for the birth. On the day of the incident, Kathy claimed she took the child from Jamie and left, asserting that she did not harm him. Kathy's account sounded unbelievable. How could Ashley plan such a transaction, and how did she know 9 months in advance that Jamie would have a baby, especially a boy? Furthermore, Kathy could not provide any contact information or even a description of Ashley, making it clear that she was lying. The detectives quickly noticed her inconsistencies. Eventually, she admitted that the story about purchasing a baby was untrue, but she continued to claim that she took the baby from Jamie's home early in the morning, insisting that Jamie simply vanished after handing over the baby. Kathy did not explain how she ended up with a stranger's child in her arms, although it was evident that the child was Jamie's son. Investigators were quickly able to uncover Kathy's identity and found unsettling details about her. Her stepfather, Imran, reported witnessing her shocking behavior on several occasions. He described her as cruel, manipulative, and unpredictable, believing she was capable of committing terrible acts for her own enjoyment and benefit. Imran mentioned that Kathy had once confessed to him her potential to commit murder. Therefore, he was not surprised to see her in police custody, convinced that she could commit any crime and was indifferent to the pain she caused others. It became clear that Kathy was already known to law enforcement. Detectives found a police report accusing her of stalking a pregnant teacher with whom she worked. Their interactions at school were frequent, and Kathy's behavior had become so troubling that it frightened the teacher, who detailed several disturbing incidents. One particularly alarming moment occurred when the teacher was alone in her office and noticed Kathy silently watching her from the aisle. Remarkably, during the time the teacher was pregnant, Kathy also claimed that she was expecting a baby. Later, the teacher experienced a miscarriage, and shortly after that, Kathy's alleged pregnancy also ended. If these events had unfolded differently, that teacher might have become a victim instead of Jamie. The detectives were determined to extract a confession from Kathy. They were not going to let her leave but needed solid evidence first. There were crucial details that Kathy was not aware of. Despite her persistence, the investigators believed that Jamie was no longer alive. When Kathy and her friend Shelley arrived at the hospital with the child, the placenta was discovered. This raised serious concerns about the childbirth. Normally, placentas remain inside the mother after delivery, leading to suspicions that Kathy had attempted an untrained surgical procedure, similar to a cesarean section. The police interviewed doctors and hospital staff. Experts indicated that if a mother's heart stops, there is typically a window of no more than 5 minutes to save the baby. Kathy was likely aware of this urgency, which may have caused her to act carelessly and make several mistakes that could have endangered her child's life. Detectives believed that Jamie had bled out and died shortly after the brutal procedure began. During the questioning, Kathy began to show signs of distress but did not admit to murder. She continued to weave stories under the detectives' pressure, avoiding direct questions, and suggested that she needed to be placed in a psychiatric unit, implying she was mentally unstable. In response, the police shifted their approach. Instead of pressuring her further, they tried to soothe her, suggesting that her actions might have been accidental. Their goal was to gather any information they could. Kathy was the last person to see Jamie alive, so all suspicion fell on her. The police continued their investigation due to concerns that she might evade capture. The police questioned those closest to Kathy, but no one could confirm her story. However, detectives eventually gathered important information revealing Kathy's true nature. Her own children shared troubling insights about her. Just 2 weeks before Kathy showed up at the hospital with a baby, she had visited a flea market with her kids and purchased a powerful stun gun. The seller warned that this model could incapacitate an adult with direct contact. While testing it, Kathy approached a large stranger at the market and waved the stun gun in front of him. When he remained unfazed, she pressed it against his leg, causing him to collapse. Pleased with her actions, Kathy laughed and walked away. Under pressure from detectives, Kathy began to disclose unsettling details of her plan. She initially wanted to simulate giving birth as realistically as possible, even considering placing the fetus and placenta inside herself. When this proved too complicated, she devised an alternative. Arriving at a friend's house, she sat in the back seat, holding the baby while using cut-out female organs to create the illusion of having just given birth. Regardless, she still refused to reveal Jamie's whereabouts. Her family members confirmed her violent tendencies. In fact, Kathy's own mother was so afraid of her that she took Kathy's children from her first marriage and raised them herself. Shannon's relatives were horrified by Kathy's erratic behavior and urged him to end their relationship. After receiving partial recognition of her situation, Kathy began to elaborate on her belief that she had multiple personalities. She insisted that it was not her, but an alter ego named Lindsay, who approached her friend with the baby. This persona was used to shift the blame for everything that happened to Jamie, although Kathy avoided providing specific details. She frequently mentioned that she belonged in a mental hospital instead of prison. Kathy claimed that when her personality switched, she experienced blackouts and couldn't remember anything. She described instances where she could get into a car, lose touch with reality, and wake up in a completely different part of the city without knowing how she got there. Detectives, however, suspected that Kathy was lying. They discovered that she had previously discussed plans to kidnap another child with her relatives and had even sought her children's assistance. When they refused, she dismissed it as a joke. Kathy's mother recounted how her daughter had repeatedly urged her to help commit murder, but she flatly refused. People who knew Kathy well denied her claims of having a split personality, stating that she had never exhibited such issues before. During the interrogation, Kathy's second personality appeared very self-assured, insisting that no charges could stick to her. Kathy continued to assert that Jamie was alive, despite the severity of Jamie's injuries, which made survival impossible. This bravado quickly faded when Kathy learned she was being accused of murder. After her arrest, Kathy finally agreed to cooperate with the authorities, even leading them to the location of Jamie's body. It was then that the true extent of the crime emerged. Kathy's friendship with Jamie was greatly exaggerated. In reality, Jamie had been another victim of Kathy, who had been stalking her. Kathy had lured Jamie into meetings with gifts and promises of a job. She brought the police to a wooded area where Jamie's body was found, badly mutilated and lifeless, with signs of being shocked by a stun gun on her neck. This was the same stun gun that Kathy had purchased at a flea market with her children just 2 weeks prior to the crime. When Jamie's body was discovered, it was revealed that she had died from multiple stab wounds and excessive blood loss. Kathy had immobilized her with an electric shock gun and then performed a cesarean section in the forest. This is why the baby was found covered in grass and dirt when Kathy brought him to her friend's house. Kathy admitted that she hadn't researched adequately to prepare for such a dangerous procedure. She only looked online once and thought that was sufficient, which was clearly inadequate for someone without any medical training. Kathy, who was 40 years old, was charged with first-degree murder, as well as kidnapping both an adult and a baby. In court, she cried and pleaded guilty to the charges of kidnapping and murder. The baby she had taken from Jamie survived and was later named Isaiah Allen Stice Reynolds, honoring his late mother with his second surname. He was placed with his father. Kathy sent letters to her children explaining what had happened, but those letters contained many lies. She was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her children were placed in a foster home, and her husband remarried, finding a stable partner. In interviews, Kathy's children stated that on the day of the crime, their mother appeared completely normal and was not anxious about the act she was committing. During the trial, Kathy's stepfather expressed his sorrow, not primarily for his relationship with Kathy, but because he was relieved that she could no longer harm anyone. He also felt deep remorse over Jamie's death, regretting that he hadn't reported Kathy to the police after she confessed her intention to kill, believing that doing so might have saved Jamie's life. The case of Jamie Stice is a chilling story of despair, deceit, and unspeakable acts of brutality. Set in the peaceful small town of Morgantown, Kentucky, this tragedy reveals the dark side of the desire to become a mother, leading Kathy Coy down an unforgivable path of crime. Jamie Stice, a young pregnant woman filled with hopes for the future, became a victim of manipulation and horrifying violence, leaving her son, Isaiah Allen Stice Reynolds, motherless from the moment he was born. Kathy was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and must pay for her sins. However, the pain she inflicted on Jamie's family and her own is irreparable. This case serves not only as a warning about the destructive power of deceit but also raises questions about the boundary between love and obsession. Crime lovers, what do you think about this haunting ending? Leave your thoughts.